The story begins with someone talking about the day the gates opened, causing the fall of the world. Among the countless humans who died helplessly, a small fraction awakened supernatural powers, the so-called saviors. Also known as players, the protagonist is part of this small group, being a rank F player, the Great Emperor of Steel. He is titled Hyeonuk, the last savior of humanity. However, this grand image shatters as he starts cursing. Returning to reality, he was upside down, dressed in military uniform, admitting that his life is pretty messed up. While everyone was in a somewhat suspicious position, their commander ordered them to get their heads straight. Unfortunately, in reality, everyone who awakened powers was forced to serve in the army and the anti-monster troops, also known as AMT. The protagonist was extremely annoyed, questioning why he was in such a position if he was humanity's last savior. They were in a shooting range, being forced to stay like that under the scorching sun. There were various military trucks and weapons near the soldiers. The commander shouted, saying they were the strongest and yet had lost 9 cartridges. Suddenly, the protagonist begins to use his power. Silently, he removes one of the cartridges from his pocket. Using his abilities, he places the cartridge in his mouth. The guy asks if they are in their right minds. Immediately, everyone responds that they are not. Hyeonuk notices that a status window appears beside him. The system alerts him that he currently has 300 grams of metal for manipulation. While chewing the cartridge, the protagonist states that there's no way to be mentally okay since this is his second time serving. Suddenly, we see a fragment of a memory where Hyeonuk was spitting blood. This was a near future where he was lying on the ground while someone wearing a plague doctor mask approached. The city around him was completely destroyed. Explosions were happening while piles of corpses were scattered through the streets. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of people were stacked like mountains of flesh. Smiling, he says that in the end, it wasn't the monsters that destroyed humanity but the players themselves. The person begins to remove his mask while asking if this is the last hero, the Great Emperor of Steel. Removing his mask, the man with red eyes affirms that no, saying that this is just Hyeonuk, a rank F. As he opens his arms, the man declares that the protagonist doesn't understand that they are divine beings who judge humanity. Enraged, Hyeonuk says they are not divine beings, assuring that if he had known how to get stronger before, he would have defeated them easily. With a wide smile, the man asks if he is frustrated, saying that even if the protagonist could become stronger, the result would not change. Hyeonuk cries as he looks at his opponents with extreme anger. The madman says that someone useless like him, a rank F, is destined to die this way anyway. The man leaves, saying this is the most fitting end for someone like him, while a large man lifts his hammer to finish him off. Before being struck, Hyeonuk screams the man's name, calling him Gordon Tracy. He narrates that this is how he died and that he didn't expect to regress, just like in web novels. The system congratulates him for discovering how to increase his strength and informs him that in 10 minutes the metal will be absorbed. The officer said he would fix their minds and that after he says 1, they must shout soldier, and if he says 2, they must shout mentality. While struggling to maintain his position, Hyeonuk says he has returned to the past and that his abilities are at the initial level. The officer starts shouting the number 1 followed by 2, and so repeatedly, several times. After that, they were in another location while performing a count. The officer was coordinating the troops, ordering the 2nd squad of the 3rd platoon to move in. Extremely bored, the protagonist assumes he never imagined he would return there. Even a cat got food before they did. The sergeant calls for the support squad. Hyeonuk introduces himself as a corporal, but the man says that before anything else they need to do something. Tired, the protagonist says they just finished training. With a smile, the man asks if someone mentioned training. He calls Hyeonuk a loser, while the boy says he forgot about him, a scum of the army Sanguk. The man approaches the protagonist, asking if his squad should handle the work. He claims that rank up players can't even level up, so they should take on more tasks for that reason. Sanguk asks if they would take responsibility if something urgent happened while his squad was working. Some people find it amusing that the man is humiliating the protagonist, saying he won't have it easy just because he's a corporal. Looking at the officer, extremely irritated, Hyeonuk questions how much of a failure he was in the past. Furious, the man asks what kind of look that is and if the protagonist wants to die. He extends his arm as magical circles form around him. Hyeonuk's squad mates are surprised by this. The man starts asking if the boy wants to go through with this, asserting that he is rank D, after taking a deep breath to calm himself. With a mocking smirk, Hyeonuk says they will, but asks him to give them some food first. Annoyed, the man asks what he's talking about. The protagonist tells the surgeon to look around, saying that people might think he's being abusive. Hyeonuk says he's worried that strange rumors might ruin the bright future awaiting Sanguk. Irritated that his actions did not go as planned, the man simply agrees. He says that since it was a request from the corporal, they should eat as quickly as possible, but must also do the work with the same speed. Inconveniently for the officer, he has to praise the protagonist's squad after the task is completed. He coughs, trying to cover it up while looking at the others. Angry, the man asks what they're staring at and tells everyone to go eat already. The corporal tells Jumbo to go eat, saying he's not hungry as he walks away. Confused, his squadmate watches, unsure if everything is okay. Sangmuk also watches the protagonist leave, remarking that he seems different. After walking some distance, he hides behind a wall. Hyeonuk bites his lips in anger, partially calming down, he admits he handled it well. Recalling Tracy, the protagonist admits that this was nothing compared to what that lunatic did. The system notifies him that he can now manipulate 1 more gram. The protagonist realizes that if he spends too much time here on petty fights, he won't be able to catch up to him. Still looking at the system, Hyeonuk notices that only 1 gram has increased. While grabbing several spoons, he declares he can't let the others know he can increase his level. In the cafeteria, people were arguing about where all the spoons had gone. Someone calls out to Jummo, saying they have a problem since all the spoons are missing. Outside, the protagonist, acting crazy, was eating them. He was shrinking them one by one. Hyeonuk admits they taste purely of steel. The system informs him that 13 minutes remain until the metals are absorbed, and that there has been an unexpected increase after absorbing 1.25 grams. He picks up his bayonet and notices it weighs 140 grams. If he wants to increase his weight for more impact, he will only be able to control 1. Disheartened, he notes that the cartridges weigh only 1 gram and the spoons 1.25 grams. At this rate, it will take a long time to reach his former level. He wonders if this is the only option he has, realizing he still has 3 days to prepare. Casting a sharp look, he presumes he will have to defeat a level 1 boss. His backpack begins to levitate. So do the sheath of his knife and all his clothes. Hyeonuk starts to control the bayonet with his mind as an aura glows around him. Stretching out his hand, the protagonist smiles, saying he will show everyone what it means to be a specialist. After 3 days, Hyeonuk was at the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Battalion at the Namsan Station in the 5th Post. He was in the guardhouse, accompanied by another person. It was Jummo, who watched his corporal with confusion. Indifferently, the protagonist remained as though distant. Hyeonuk looks at his watch, leaving his subordinate even more curious. The young man tells the protagonist that he seems to have changed lately. Noticing it's already 4 or 5 in the morning, the corporal asks if this bothers him. Quickly, the subordinate says it doesn't, while the protagonist checks his system. It notifies him again, showing that the protagonist can now manipulate 6 grams more, totaling 1.359 grams. The young man keeps trying to justify himself, saying the corporal has changed for the better. Suddenly, the corporal starts walking toward him, making him extremely nervous. Abruptly, the protagonist asks if the young man trusts him. Frightened, Jummo says yes. With a cold gaze, Hyeonuk questions if that's true, calling the boy by his name. His subordinate affirms it again, surprised to see the protagonist cock his weapon. All of a sudden, a portal opens near them, unleashing several monsters. The creatures rise, preparing to explore their surroundings. The monsters observe the army camp just below. Inside the barracks, the soldiers sleep peacefully. One of the creatures opens its mouth to roar, but a bayonet flies toward it. It strikes the monster, throwing it backward. The monster falls to the ground, already emitting a foul stench. In front of the gate stands the protagonist with his dagger. His energy forms a sort of thread, allowing him to control the knife remotely. Dozens of monsters are staring him down. With a smile, Hyeonuk says he never thought he'd be happy to see them, but he's been waiting for them for 3 days. However, surprisingly, something catches his attention. The monster that was attacked leans on its sword, standing back up. As he manipulates his dagger, he remarks that he has never failed a surprise attack, and this proves he's still at level 1. He begins to spin the bayonet. The protagonist says this is his second life, but he truly hates doing the same thing twice. The monster charges at him again, and Hyeonuk says that if it drops something bad, the goblin will truly be dead. The creature leaps with its mouth open, but the protagonist easily decapitates it with the spinning blade. The monster falls without a single chance to defend itself. The bayonet gets stuck in a tree trunk. The remaining monsters grow furious at their comrade's death. The creature drops a red crystal. Using his ability to levitate his prize, he remarks that he knows the future. The man places the object in his mouth. Even the monsters are confused by what he just did. Chewing, Hyeonuk says he recognizes this stench. It's definitely mana steel. The creatures are utterly disgusted by his behavior. The system informs him that the amount absorbed in grams is unknown and mana will also increase after absorption. Observing the status window, he realizes that if he consumes every item he finds from now on, the difficulty of this life will be drastically reduced. Hyeonuk gives the monsters a terrifying look. They all appear deeply bewildered. The protagonist pulls the dagger from the tree. Excited, he declares that his mukbang is about to begin. Rewinding a bit to the past, after the protagonist cocked his weapon, they hear a loud roar. The corporal covers his subordinate's mouth, saying he can feel the metal vibrating. The boy asks if he can really sense it without seeing it. Jummo suggests reporting it, but the protagonist argues they would never believe a rank F could sense something he can't see. Frightened, the young man asks what they should do. The corporal asks the boy to promise him something while he goes to investigate, instructing Jummo not to abandon his post, and that he must not report this to superiors. Returning to the present moment, Hyeonuk is frighteningly excited. He declares that if the military finds out, all the drops would belong to the government. The group of monsters charges charges at him enraged. Hyunwook launches his attack, declaring that his feast begins now. As he dives into the midst of the enemies, he manipulates his dagger. The monsters gather, trying to attack him, but they only hit the ground. The protagonist managed to dodge the blow. Once again, he spins his dagger. With a flick of his hand, Hyunwook sends the bayonet toward the creatures. It cuts the Achilles tendon of one. To immobilize them, he cuts the tendons of several monsters. To his surprise, one of them is up in a tree, observing everything. The monster wears several types of necklaces, visibly furious about the situation. While some lie on the ground, unable to get up, another attempts to attack Hyunwook. In a sadistic tone, the protagonist urges them to keep screaming. Noticing another opponent's attack, he is caught off guard. Now able to manipulate more metal, he grabs one of the swords lying on the ground. With a simple hand motion, Hyunwook repels his enemy's attack. The monster loses its weapon as others approach. The creature, panicked, tries to grab its sword again, but the protagonist is already preparing to strike. With a single motion, he slashes the monster's neck. The corporal quickly regains his stance. Desperately, the creature tries to stop the bleeding. He cuts the being again, stating that this will maximize the fear. Another red crystal is dropped. Horrifying everyone further, Hyunwook screams, claiming he died once from being attacked from behind and demands to know how they dare to do that. Enraged, he threatens that if anyone attacks him from behind again, he will eat that monster alive. All the monsters bristle like frightened cats, making the protagonist realize he has instilled enough fear. As some of them retreat, Hyunwook asks if they should now begin with the main course. Looking at the crowd on his right, he admits it's a bit frustrating. Turning his gaze to the other side, he wonders where the leader is. While the boss growls, the young man keeps searching for him. However, as a cunning creature, the boss is observing the entire battle from atop a tree, extremely irritated by the situation. This was a goblin shaman. Noticing the crystal near his foot, Hyunwook remarks that he should begin and crouches to pick it up. Seeing this opening, the boss decides to attack. As he grabs the crystal, Hyunwook remarks that the goblin won't miss this opportunity. After all, he's different from these stupid monsters. With a crazed smile, he says the prey is defenseless, and the boss must attack and reveal himself. Equally smug, the boss casts a spell, breaking one of the talismans on his necklace. Sensing where the attack comes from, the protagonist feels elated. In the blink of an eye, the ground forms spikes, impaling several goblins. Meanwhile, in the barracks, a few lights are still on. A soldier asks the platoon leader if the ground just trembled. The man asks if his subordinate is scared and threatens to kill him if he wakes him again for something so trivial. Back on the battlefield, many monsters have been impaled by the spikes. They were completely pierced by the boss's attack. The survivors can't comprehend what just happened. From atop the tree, the boss observes everything. He roars, believing he has won, but something catches his attention. The protagonist declares that he has found him, leaving the boss completely startled. He throws one of the swords the monsters were wielding, spinning it like a propeller. But the shaman raises his staff. Striking the blade, he manages to deflect it. Sitting on one of the impaled monster's bodies, Hyunwook laments as that was his perfect throw. Crazily, the monster starts laughing maniacally. To the boss's surprise, the protagonist claims it was a lie while manipulating his bayonet. The shaman realizes too late about the blade. A metallic sound echoes through the forest. The corporal is left in disbelief at what he's seeing. The boss had stopped the blade with his bare hand. With some difficulty, he was gripping the protagonist's dagger with his bare hands. Furious, he glares at Hyunwook, his hand bleeding. Smiling, the protagonist admits he's surprised, acknowledging that the boss managed to stop his attack with one hand and calling him trash in the same breath. Unamused, the boss stares at the boy while still holding his blade. Preparing his rifle, Hyunwook commands him to come down, saying he will cut them all at once. Looking around, the young man realizes he bluffed. He notices the crowd of monsters surrounding him and wonders what to do now that the boss is fighting directly. To make matters worse, this encouraged the other monsters, who had lost their fear, to rally once again. To his surprise, the system notifies him of a lack of mana, stating he has used too much and only 40% remains. Hyunwook complains that his mana is the biggest issue and that now, having reached this point, he has no choice, unlocking his weapon. The boss raises his staff, preparing to attack. Frustrated, the protagonist yells that if he can't eat the boss, they will both die together, and even if it takes time, he will eat him and return to the post. The monster casts a terrifying look and smile. Suddenly, Jummo calls for the corporal. Startled, the protagonist turns around, trying to find him. The boy keeps shouting, asking where Hyunwook is. Seeing this opening, the shaman orders the others to attack. The monsters charge forward. Irritated, Hyunwook points his weapon at them. Frightened, Jummo screams as he sees the group charging toward him. One of the goblins attempts an attack, but the protagonist tells the boy to duck. Following the instruction, the boy ducks as the corporal shoots at the monster. Again, the creature prepares to dodge, but the protagonist throws one of the swords at it. The monster manages to block the attack. Even so, Hyunwook leaps at it, placing his weapon in the creature's mouth. He shoots, mercilessly killing the monster. The corporal lands just behind, trying to regain his footing. Quickly, he aims at the remaining enemies. Surprisingly, there's no one left but him and his subordinate. The portal is still open, yet not a single monster is in sight. His bayonet remains stuck in the ground. Mentally, the protagonist admits his defeat. Furious, he realizes everything is more cautious than he had anticipated. Suddenly, loud voices come through his radio communicator, reporting gunfire and identifying the area as the 5th post. Seeing no other option, the corporal begins to report that portal was opened. Informing that the monsters are goblins and have retreated from the initial area, he looks at his subordinate. Still slightly annoyed, the protagonist picks up his radio again. He announces there are no casualties. The barracks respond that they've received his report and that he must defend the post. The voice repeats once more, emphasizing that the 5th post must hold its position. Hyeonuk notices reinforcements will arrive soon. Meanwhile, a badass woman walks through a corridor as others report they'll be ready in 5 minutes for the emergency. This was the AMT Paladin, Lieutenant Seo Yuna. The protagonist reflects that if she arrives just as in his past life, the woman will eliminate all the monsters and close the portal. With that, all the equipment will fall under the army's control. He also recalls a legendary item called adamantium. This item was what earned him the title of Emperor of Steel, and if he misses this chance, the next opportunity won't come for another 4 years, and if that happens, he'll face the same fate as his past life. Frustrated, he decides he will claim the item first. Hyeonuk declares that he needs to finish this before the team arrives. He remembers that goblins require a live sacrifice. The boy asks what's going on as the protagonist tries to deduce where they've gone. Realizing that for goblins who hunt in groups, the city is too dense to be a plausible location, he arrives at another conclusion. Through his radio, someone yells that they're from the 6th post and have spotted goblins. Something glimmers among the trees, leaving the corporal and his subordinate stunned. Noticing this, the protagonist breaks into a wide grin. He shouts into the radio, identifying himself as being from the 5th post and offering to support the 6th. However, someone on the radio dismisses them, stating that there's nothing an F-rank can do. They continue insulting him, but Hyeonuk simply lowers the volume. Hyeonuk tries to stop him, warning that this will not only get him confined to the post, but also result in a court-martial. The protagonist states that the 6th post consists of archers and mages. In other words, there's no one skilled in close combat. But the boy asks what difference it will make if Hyeonuk goes alone. Pointing at the boy, the protagonist replies that he's not alone, after all, he has him. Jummo, confused, questions whether the corporal heard him correctly. Some soldiers at the 6th post were crying for help, saying that Corporal Jungnak had been taken down. Around the post, dozens of goblins were trying to breach the area. A soldier tried to shield himself while asking if his corporal was okay. On the ground, the man stated he wouldn't be able to maintain the barrier much longer, prompting his comrade to plead for help over the radio. Confused, they wondered why everything suddenly became so quiet. Outside, some rocks were floating. The shaman was using magic. He hurled several fragments of stone. Trying to protect themselves, they asked what was coming this time. Both understood it was a monster, and that after destroying the post, it would capture them and take them to the altar to be sacrificed, ripping their hearts out while they were still alive. The corporal pointed his rifle at his own face while his comrade tried to stop him, but he insisted that ending it now would be less painful. The boy cried as he watched the scene. Once again, numerous stones hovered above the post. The boss prepared another attack. Someone spoke over the radio, offering help and instructing him to load his arrow with fire and aim for the light. He repeated the command, urging the boy to load his arrow with fire and aim for the light. While following the instruction, the boy stated that they'd need an entire unit of archers like him to fight effectively. The soldier, still desperate, asked what to do as he watched the wave of stones coming his way. The boy declared he couldn't see what he was aiming at, questioning who or what he should shoot at. However, he finally sees a light amidst the stones. The protagonist was on top of one of the goblins with his flashlight on, asking the archer to simply aim his weapon at the light. Hyeonuk says he will be the one to control the trigger. With that, he makes a gesture with his finger, as if pulling a trigger. The boy's crossbow activates on its own. Shocked, he says that his trigger moved by itself. The flaming arrow flies through the stones, hitting the monster that the protagonist was holding perfectly. The creature tries to pull the arrow out. However, an explosion occurs, killing the goblin. A system notifies him that he used 1% more of his mana. Happy, Hyeonuk claims that this way he can conserve his mana. To everyone's surprise, they hear something terrifying. The shaman was watching them from above. He starts manipulating the stones again, hurling them toward the posts. The protagonist leaps, dodging the attack. A large trail of destruction is left by the boss's strike. The archer, still frightened, is instructed by Hyeonuk to reload. He also orders the boy to aim at the light again. The boss stood on a cliff overlooking the entire situation. One by one, the goblins were dying due to the coordinated attack of the protagonist and the archer. Seeing the situation, the shaman becomes increasingly enraged. In the dark forest, Jummo wonders how a soldier like him would face the boss, questioning if he wouldn't die the moment he sent the signal. However, in front of him was a battlefield covered in goblins, set ablaze thanks to his corporal's incredible strategy. The boy realizes that Hyeonuk had told him him he would distract the monsters, but at this rate, he would destroy the portal on his own. Suddenly, a monster notices his presence. It tries to attack the soldier. Jumbo freezes, unsure of what to do. Fortunately, the protagonist deflects the monster's attack with his dagger, aiming his flashlight. He moves toward the creature. Once again, Hyeonuk activates the trigger. Another arrow hits a goblin. It burns as the protagonist rushes past the soldier. Silently, he points in a direction. The boy follows his orders, saying that the rifle will cover his position. Jumno once again questions if this is really his corporal. The boss watched the destruction of all his subordinates. Hyeonuk asserts that this should be enough. As he looks at the status window, he wonders if that coward will appear, arriving at another conclusion. The system warns him that he has only 12% mana left and recommends he take that into account when acting. Frustrated, the protagonist realizes the boss is waiting for that, admitting that if his mana runs out, it will be the end for his comrades. At this moment, someone calls out to him, pleading for him to save them. The shaman is using Jumno as a hostage. The boy says he followed all of Hyunwook's orders and apologizes. Without saying a word, the protagonist raises his bayonet. However, the boss brings the sharp end of his staff closer to the soldier's neck. He starts speaking something in the goblin language. Hyunwook becomes extremely enraged. He deactivates his metal manipulation while two more goblins approach from behind him. Feigning resistance, he says that all of this is Jumno's fault. Both goblins leap and try to attack him. Smiling, he points his finger at the boss, saying this is a checkmate. He moves his finger again. The subordinate's rifle, aimed at the boss, fires. The weapon begins to fire frantically, forcing the monster to release the boy. The shaman coughs up blood as he feels excruciating pain. The corporal dodges attacks while heading toward the boss. His soldier falls next to the monster. The boy confirms that he's okay. Extremely pleased, the protagonist says that in that case, he must have a good appetite, throwing his spinning dagger at the boss, who tries to run desperately. However, when struck by the blade, the skin he wore deflects the attack. Again, the system alerts about his mana level, stating that only 9% remains. Trying to attack again, Hyunwook questions why the monster only protected his back. The shaman, consumed by fear, tries to reach the portal. He pushes himself harder and harder, trying to escape death. Noticing his enemy's plan, the protagonist throws his bayonet, asking if he really wants to go to the portal. Hyunwook shouts while running quickly. The monster was far from him and extremely close to the portal. The creature stretches out his arm, trying to escape, but its cord suddenly glows. With this, the protagonist realizes it is metal. The system warns him that he has only 7% mana left. He stretches out his hand with an open palm, and quickly closes it while pulling backward. Thus, he manages to stop the boss, even with his mana almost depleted. With no other choice, the protagonist pulls the enemy's chain even harder. The boss could do nothing to stop him. With the monster finally immobilized on the ground, he throws his dagger to deliver the final blow. His mana drops to 1% as he prays for it all to end, striking the monster's head. The impact is so strong that the ground trembles. His mana finally reaches 0%. Gasping for air, he sees that his abilities remain the same, but this body is far inferior to his previous one. Suddenly, a bright light illuminates the area and he realizes it is the sacred light. Noticing that the emergency team had arrived, and that woman was there. Desperately, he tries to find the item on the monster's body. Finally, he locates the gem and removes it with some disgust. Someone shouts that they found the portal. The soldiers demand he raise his hands where they will shoot. With no choice, the man puts the entire crystal in his mouth. They ask the protagonist to identify himself with his name and rank. With his mouth smeared in goblin blood, he turns and declares himself to be Hyunwook, a corporal. They inform him they found an injured person and call for a stretcher to carry the protagonist. The soldiers note that since the portal is still open, there must be some enemies left alive. Yuna questions whether 4 ordinary soldiers could really defeat a boss. As she examines the bodies, she concludes that this isn't exactly the case. All of them bear similar wounds. Realizing that this was indeed the work of a single person, the system congratulates him but also issues a warning, stating that the metal being absorbed will now experience a delay of 9 hours. While being carried, he smiles, realizing it was worth it. The system informs him that the metal is enchanted, and that he will gain abilities accordingly, along with an unknown amount of grams. Observing the protagonist, the lieutenant wonders how someone like him could be smiling at a time like this. The system congratulates him again, informing him that after consuming the legendary item, he will be able to detect all metals within his range. Surprised, he declares that he's finally back. A soldier announces that 2 goblins are running toward the 6th post, and Yuna quickly draws her sword. He notices that he can indeed sense the resonances of the metals around him. Raising his fist, Hyunwook proclaims that today is the day the great Emperor of Steel has finally returned. A few days after the incident, in the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Battalion, some female soldiers were discussing the rumors about rank F. They say that according to the rumors, some soldiers were awaiting death, but a rank F corporal appeared and massacred the goblins. One of them says it's just a fantasy, as that would be impossible. Meanwhile, someone else is vomiting. It was Sang-guk angrily asking if they really expect him to believe that. A soldier salutes, saying it's true, while another man tells him to lower his voice. The chubby one leans on the boy, saying that the sergeant didn't acknowledge the salute, yet an ill is lowering his hand anyway. Frightened, the soldier salutes again. He was the archer whom the protagonist had saved. The sergeant asks for the chubby man's name. He introduces himself as Wonduk. Sang-guk orders him to take 3 more boys and head to a portal, but he refuses, saying it's impossible. The sergeant states that he's never seen ordinary soldiers defeat a crowd along with a boss, so he thinks it was just a stroke of luck. And that if that's the case, a disobedient rank F soldier is a danger to military discipline. The big guy starts laughing maniacally while squeezing the boy's head. Sang-guk then tells Anil that they can't let this go. Meanwhile, in the barracks where the protagonist was, there were several doors in a strangely white corridor. In the battalion commander's office, someone was saluting. Hyeonuk introduces himself, saying he's there to resolve something. Internally irritated, he wonders if everything didn't go well, and if so, why they called him here. The lieutenant was also present. She was a rank B paladin. Beside her stood Lieutenant Minhee, a rank C mage. The commander asks if it's true that he disobeyed his orders to wait, also questioning if he faced the portal's first wave. This was Kang-suk, nicknamed the King of the Namsan Mountains, rank B. Mentally, he notes that saying the wrong thing could lead to a military tribunal, and that he just wants to stand guard. The protagonist admits it's true, and that after the portal surge, he responded immediately. The commander remarks that someone like him in that situation would have been torn to pieces. The protagonist thinks this is truly intense pressure, and that if he has to return here in the future, his military life will be ruined. He gives a slight smile. Hyeonuk says he feels wronged and deceived by the battalion commander. The Ishigo from March 25th asks how the protagonist dares to say such a thing, but Kang-suk orders him to stop. Surprised, Minhee returns to his place. Still staring at the protagonist, the commander asks why. The corporal says that he always says one thing every time he trains them, something that is always said without fail, and asks if Kang-suk doesn't remember. Remembering that he always says if you're part of the anti-monsters unit, it doesn't matter if you're rank A or even rank E, you're capable of defeating trolls. He mentions that according to the commander himself, someone of rank F like him might struggle against a troll, but not a goblin, adding that if he hadn't disobeyed the control center's order, all the soldiers at the 6th post would be dead. Mentally, he acknowledges that this was his rational attack, and now he'll attack emotionally. Recalling another one of Kang-suk's speeches, stating that for a true soldier, ranks don't exist, they fight with all their strength. The protagonist begins to say that, as a true soldier and as a follower of the commander, a person he greatly respects. He says he applied the tactics he acquired from difficult training, and that he only endured military life as a rank F, thanks to the admiration he has for the commander. Seeing him belittle his efforts feels as though his military life means nothing. Back when Kang-suk was appointed 2nd lieutenant, the portals were opening, and he was almost killed in a fight with orcs. Yet without a moment's hesitation, he returned to the army, and became one of the first members of the anti-monsters troop. In other words, he is a true warrior. The protagonist states that he told him he admired him, and that he risked his life for his comrades. There would be no reason to send him to the tribunal. The commander grabs him by the arms, asking if this is truly his belief, calling him a soldier. With some fear, the protagonist says his name is Hyeonuk. Suddenly, the wild-eyed man asks him to become his sub-officer. Abruptly, the system congratulates him, saying the absorption is complete and that he has acquired the ability of physical transformation. Both the protagonist and the commander stare at each other in silence. Both lieutenants feel a mix of embarrassment and surprise. The commander had tears in his eyes as he nodded. On the other hand, Hyeonuk was cold sweating, a mixture of fear and astonishment. He kept staring at Kang-suk, unsure how to react, questioning whether he had heard him correctly. Later, Hyeonuk was in the training room of the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Battalion. He was calmly training there, placing the weights in their proper spots. While catching his breath, he assumes he's doomed for trying to avoid both the guard post and the military tribunal. The chubby man, along with the sergeant, were watching the protagonist. Sang-guk, planning something, gives an order to the guy. Hyeonuk recalls Lieutenant Minhee telling the commander that a rank F has never become a sub-officer. The protagonist thanks the lieutenant for buying him some time. After all, it's better to live like a rat than attract attention now. Wonsuk approaches, asking if the corporal is done using the bench, but he replies that he isn't yet. However, he notices something upon observing more closely. Seeing the strange smile plastered across the chubby man's face, Hyeonuk asks what he's plotting now. Wonsuk says that seeing the most famous person of the moment using only that weight would be an embarrassment to their unit. Several people present look on curiously at the situation. The protagonist notices a specific group of people laughing. He realizes it's the sergeant and suspects he's the one who orchestrated all of this, wanting to humiliate him while everyone mocks him. Hyeonuk remarks that if he avoids them now, they will bully him as they did in his past life. He admits he didn't want to draw too much attention, but since it's like this, he tells Wonsuk he was annoyed and that he showed up at the right time. Calling the chubby man out for a fight, both Sang-guk and Wonsuk are taken aback. With this, everyone begins saying that 2 soldiers are about to fight. They finally step into a fighting cage. Calmly, the protagonist puts on his gloves. Similarly, Wonsuk does the same. The chubby man says it's time for him to learn a lesson. He charges straight at the protagonist, trying to land a punch with his left arm. In another place, someone asks how Choi Yeonjun went on vacation. A man admits he was excited to hear that he had the potential to become a sword saint. A soldier tries to calm the sub-officer, saying that while Manga is considered the current ace, there's another ace in the future. The man becomes curious about this. He says that for the first lieutenant to come there and leave empty-handed is a bit disappointing and asks him to accompany him while he's there. Back at the fight, the protagonist was dodging one of the attacks. He firmly plants his foot on the ground, lowering himself and evading yet another strike. With a certain degree of ease, he manages to dodge all the attacks. However, Hyunwook ends up cornered against one of the bars. Quickly, his opponent runs toward him, delivering another powerful strike. Even the protagonist is startled by how this situation unfolds. The spectators anticipate what's about to happen and are scared. To everyone's surprise, Hyunwook rolls on the ground, escaping that position. Skillfully, he rises, positioning himself behind his opponent, making a gesture with his fingers, signaling his opponent to hurry up. The chubby man becomes extremely enraged. Watching the fight, some people begin to cheer them on. Anil says it feels like the stage is set for Mr. Myancho to watch. He asks the lieutenant for his opinion, noting that Wonseok's punches seem very strong. Still observing the fight, the man notices the speed of the attacks and how the opponent manages to dodge them all. Myancho asks what the point of it all is, considering Wonseok can't even land a hit. Anil responds that it's because he's inexperienced. If he lands a single blow, it will be a knockout for sure. Surgeon Sengbuk was furious. He yells that Wonseok is very uncoordinated and orders him to get himself together immediately. Various people start shouting, asking if Wonseok thinks fighting is a joke, and tell him to take it seriously since they're betting on him. Mentally, the chubby man admits that his body feels extremely heavy. He tries to attack the protagonist again. However, the reason for his sluggishness was that the metal in his boots was being controlled by Hyunwook. The protagonist signals with his hand, acknowledging the power of controlling steel. He pins his opponent's leg to the ground. The man completely loses his balance. As expected, Hyunwook dodges the punch again. The chubby man begins to panic, unsure of what's wrong with him. The protagonist concludes that for Wonseok, it must feel like fighting in a swamp. With a sadistic smile, the protagonist looks at him. Wonseok begs him to wait. He starts saying his legs feel strange. Hyunwook asks why he's saying this all of a sudden. With a smile, he asks if things aren't going in his favor now. Irritated like a raging bull, Wonseok curses at the protagonist, saying Hyunwook is just a rank F. With that, he uses his ability, unleashing a powerful shockwave. Both Anil and the first lieutenant are intrigued by this. Suddenly, Wonseok enters berserk mode, enhancing his body. His eyes glowed red and veins bulged across his forehead. The protagonist moves his hand. Clenching his fists, he assumes a combat stance, glaring intensely at his opponent. Myancho notices that with the physical enhancement, they are no longer within the realm of sparring, yet his opponent hasn't faltered. It's like a battle between an enraged buffalo and a leopard, hiding its claws. The chubby man was enormous. The lieutenant remarks that this is entertaining, while the crazed man says he told him Wonseok wasn't a joke. The man tells Hyunwook he's going to end everything right there. Suddenly, he vanishes from Hyunwook's line of sight, delivering a massive blow to the protagonist. With overwhelming force, Hyunwook is thrown against the cage. The surgeon cheers, saying, "That's my boy." Others claim this was predictable. After all, Wonseok is on a different level. They remark that he's not called the ace of the future for no reason. Wonseok feels a pain in his wrist, saying it's like punching steel with bare hands. To everyone's surprise, the protagonist was standing unharmed. He had activated his steel body ability. Smiling, Hyunwook explains that he turned part of his body into metal. He declares that this time he'll take revenge, inviting the pig to come at him. The Trembolona insults the protagonist, calling him a useless rank F. Once again, he attempts to punch him, but the corporal easily dodges. Hyunwook remarks that using such an ability against someone like him is a waste, but even so, he activates his ability to land a kick on his enemy, striking him hard on the leg. As he throws a punch, Hyunwook says that guys like Wonseok, who think they're strong, a good beating is always the cure, leaving everyone speechless. The protagonist starts beating the big guy to the ground. Even the surgeon is shocked by what's happening. The lieutenant notes that Hyunwook has finally revealed his claws. In a deeply humiliating way, Hyunwook continues to pound Wonseok. Myancho comments that the leopard has finally bitten the buffalo's neck, and if he is truly a wild beast, there's no reason to let go of his prey's neck. He should cut off its air. However, Wonseok lifts him with one arm and prepares to land a massive punch. With his face completely beaten, Wonseok says he doesn't know what the protagonist is using to cheat, but regardless, Hyunwook looks slightly scared, staring at his opponent. The big man shouts that Hyunwook should just die as he slams him toward the ground. The corporal is genuinely scared and terrified, but Hyunwook twists his body along with his enemy's arm. Inevitably, Wonseok feels tremendous pain. His arm stops extremely close to the ground. The protagonist had performed an armbar, completely immobilizing his opponent. The big man recognizes the move as a flying armbar, Myung-ho notes that if Won-suk had struck the ground with that punch, he would have broken his own arm, acknowledging that Hyun-wook has good reflexes. Hyun-wook was struggling to maintain the hold. The lieutenant observes that a normal person wouldn't be able to fight against a barbarian with physical enhancement and wonders if it's the result of overstimulation. Won-suk says it seems like the protagonist is really fighting for his life. While trying to throw a punch, Trembolona asks if Hyun-wook thinks he can crush his arm like this. The boy keeps yelling while tightening his grip even more on Won-suk's hand. The big man curses at him, genuinely in pain. He opens his hand to throw the protagonist off balance. However, when he attempts to punch, Hyun-wook somehow manages to evade. Quickly, Hyun-wook twists backward, supporting himself on the enemy's head. In an instant, he was already applying a rear naked choke to Won-suk, rapidly positioning himself to finish off his opponent. The lieutenant celebrates, realizing his expectations were correct. After all, physical enhancement only strengthens muscles, and compressing an artery is still possible. Won-suk claims he just needs to use his strength. Suddenly, the protagonist starts smiling. Once again, he activates his body transformation ability. While being strangled by Hyun-wook, the big man questions how even his strength cannot get him out of this situation. The system warns that he is using body transformation in an area larger than his current limit. As a result, the protagonist begins to feel intense shocks throughout his body. Once again, the status window indicates that excessive use of the ability could crush the user's body. One of the spectators asks the surgeon if they shouldn't stop this, pointing out that the big man will never give up. The protagonist was suffering greatly from the punishment of the ability. As he looks at Sang-guk, he realizes that this should be enough to serve as a warning. The surgeon watches the scene, extremely nervous. Struggling to free himself, Won-suk is incredulous that he might lose to someone like the protagonist. His vision begins to darken as he wonders if he will be humiliated in front of all these people. But he declares mentally that he is the future ace, growing even larger and angrier. Suffering intensely from the punishment, Hyun-wook becomes even more frightened by his opponent's immense strength. The man grows so much that he begins to tear his own clothes. After an intense application of power, the madman becomes extremely massive, causing everything around him to crack. Both he and the protagonist were at their limits. Myung-ho, with a strange expression, wonders who the winner will be. After all, it's no use getting bigger if he can't escape the chokehold. And who among them is the true predator? Both of them roared, drawing strength from every possible source. However, Won-suk's face starts turning extremely red as he clearly loses consciousness. He collapses, causing a massive impact that forces everyone to shield their faces. Without exception, everyone present stares in shock at the outcome of this situation. With the result clear, the lieutenant remarks that this is the true predator. Seeing Hyun-wook atop his opponent's body, Myung-ho notes that he is a genuine wild beast. Someone approaches, asking if Won-suk is okay. A few people attempt to check if the big man is still alive, but given his size, they have no idea how they'll carry him. Junmo runs toward the protagonist, saying he knew he would win. Even as Hyun-wook tries to stop him, the boy keeps asking if the corporal is hurt. The corporal looks at Sang-guk, who immediately averts his gaze. He was clearly uncomfortable and worried about everything that had happened. The lieutenant approaches, asking for the protagonist's name. Hyun-wook immediately introduces himself as Corporal Hyun-wook of the First Company. The lieutenant also introduces himself, saying that the fight he just witnessed was very impressive. He hands Hyun-wook a contact card, asking if he might be interested in the Special Guerrilla Attack Unit. Some soldiers are surprised to learn that the lieutenant is from the Black Tiger Unit. They discuss the fact that the scout had just offered Hyun-wook a position in the best AMT unit. The protagonist apologizes and says that he is just a rank F player. But Myung-ho explains that ranks are merely standards set for ordinary people, and that they need warriors like him. Internally, Hyun-wook was extremely irritated that everyone wanted to recruit him. The lieutenant asks how long Hyun-wook will make him hold the card. Seeing this, Hyun-wook concludes that he will certainly face enemy groups later. Admitting he wants to keep his distance, the protagonist takes the card, thanking the lieutenant for his kindness. He says he'll think about it while saluting. The sergeant watches the whole scene, clearly furious. He continues glaring at the two, extremely irritated by what he is witnessing. Later, in the barracks, in the battalion commander's office, Kang-seok asks Myung-ho how the Black Tigers are doing these days. The first lieutenant states that they are always understaffed. The commander comments that guilds always take the best talents, whether they are of the highest ranks or even the lower levels. Suddenly, they lock eyes. Smiling, Kang-seok asks if Myung-ho is there because of Sergeant Yeon-jun. Recalling the remarkable talent of the young man, Myung-ho admits the commander is correct, but mentions he heard a rumor. Once again locking eyes in a tense manner, Myung-ho asks if Yeon-jun is on leave. The lieutenant says that thanks to this, he found a very interesting soldier. Remembering the protagonist, this piques the commander's interest. The Black Tiger member continues looking at Kang-seok, waiting for his reaction. Crossing his arms, the second lieutenant wonders who this interesting soldier might be. The first lieutenant states that it is Corporal Hyun-wook. The commander observes the protagonist running around the field while Junmo tries to hug him. Kang-seok on the phone asks someone to investigate the protagonist and his past. His subordinate finally catches up, hugging him and asking to be taught how to become stronger. Hyunwook curses the boy, trying to push him away. The boy keeps following him, saying he wants to be just like him. The protagonist asks why he wants this. Whoever was on the other end of the call agrees to the commander's request, warning that the lieutenant should be careful. The protagonist, far from heroic, was running in an extremely clumsy manner. Still observing, Kang-seok apologizes to the corporal, saying that this is not his opinion and that all of this is purely his fault for letting people become so greedy, while he opens a wide and frightening smile. In a city during the night, many people were walking normally. A woman was talking to a chef while her son noticed something. The child starts running, shouting that he saw a monkey. She stands in front of an alley, shouting for the little monkey. However, it wasn't a monkey, it was a large rat. Startled, the little boy realizes that this is not a monkey. The monsters had a pentagram on their foreheads, turning toward the child. To his despair, there were countless monsters like that coming out of a portal. On the other hand, the protagonist was surprised to see something. He was in the battalion's armory with Lieutenant Yunha. She suddenly says that the commander believes in his accomplishments and gave him time off and a weapon, but the squad leader doesn't believe in him. Bored, Hyunwook says that in his past life he was lazy and apparently that hasn't changed. While looking at a sword, he admits that whether the leader believes in him or not doesn't interest him after all. It's all in the past. Even the attendant looks a little curious about his answer. Looking at him, she asks if the corporal is really that lazy, saying that the goblins had the same blade mark, which means he stopped the first horde alone, and questions if this makes sense. The protagonist picks a small sword while stating that it's perfect. The boy swings the weapon, while Yoonho looks confused by his behavior. The woman tells him not to choose any weapon just because she's pressuring him, but Hyunwook says he genuinely likes this one. This was the cloud blade, which has the effect of absorbing and holding water, creating a humid mist. The protagonist admits that now it seems useless, but with this single sword, Yeonjun became known as the Sword Saint. The true name of this item is Black Hand of the Master of Clouds, according to the mythology of Dangan, where 3 gods of time descended to Earth: the Lord of Wind, the Master of Rain, and the Master of Clouds. His black hand was called the Hand of Darkness. After releasing all of his power, you can activate the ability of hidden blades among the clouds, generating powerful lightning. With a smile, he assumes that with the manipulation of steel and lightning, nothing will be able to stop him. The lieutenant asks if this old sword is really too small of a reward considering his accomplishments, but he says he is satisfied. He begins to say that there is no time to choose anything else. Suddenly, they hear a very loud noise, which even surprises Yuna. The control tower then informs everyone that a portal has appeared in Ankawan. Immediately, the soldiers begin to prepare for combat. The protagonist is not pleased to hear this. The girl is curious about the fact that Hyunwook is extremely calm and not surprised by the situation, as if he was expecting it. At the city entrance, some knights block the entry of people. Someone in an extremely glamorous armor walks through the streets while other soldiers accompany him. Some army soldiers are impressed by the presence of the Blue Flower Guild, saying they were sent as reinforcements for this portal. They start talking about how all the armor and weapons are stylish products and nothing more. One of them says that if they sold all the equipment they saw, they could buy a whole building in Gangnam. Suddenly, another army squad appears marching and preparing for battle. Kenwook says that as they already know, this is a portal for kobolds, and even though they are small, they are very dangerous with their weapons. One of the soldiers starts rolling up his sleeve, but the protagonist shouts at him, telling him not to do that while on duty. Jamo asks why the monsters haven't arrived there yet and questions if they really need to be so serious. But the corporal asks if he would like to have his eyes ripped out while still alive. Frightened, the boy says no, and the protagonist tells everyone to check their gas masks for emergencies. Laughing, one of those soldiers approaches, saying that apparently the trash squad also has strategy meetings. Jummo looks down after hearing this. Seeing the reaction of his subordinate, the protagonist gets genuinely angry. Hyunwook tells both of them that the kobolds escaped from the evacuation zone and that everyone should keep their masks close. Convinced, the guy says he can take care of it on his own, saying that he's not someone who needs advice from people like him. The protagonist tells him not to forget this, but the guy says he understood, calling him the commander of the useless squad. His men once again look discouraged. Hyunwook becomes even more irritated by all this arrogance. Speaking to the squad again, he orders them to pull themselves together. He says that this isn't the first time they heard this, but now their lives are at risk, so they can't afford to be shaken. Everyone agrees with their commander. He informs them that the kobolds are small monsters, so they should place motion sensors in sewers and tight spaces. With this, he comments that everyone has 20 minutes to do everything. The protagonist calls for Jummo, who promptly agrees. The soldiers begin talking about how the protagonist is extremely serious and anxious today, at the place where the army supplies were stored. The boy is confused, not understanding why the corporal called him. He looks at his subordinate silently. Embarrassed, Jummo asks what he wants. Hyunwook was about to say something when a dart hits him in the neck. A kind of poison begins circulating through his veins. Suddenly, he falls to the ground. One of the manhole covers that the soldiers were placing sensors on explodes. As a result, all the others explode as well. The soldiers try to cover their mouths and noses to avoid inhaling the poison. Just as their leader had said, they begin putting on their gas masks. Several kobolds appear, attacking the soldiers. Agonizing on the ground, paralyzed by the poison, Hyeonuk only watch. Suddenly, a monster approaches him. It was the portal boss. He observes his enemy as his pupils dilate. The kobold raises a dagger to stab him. Still immobilized, the protagonist can only watch as the enemy tries to strike him with a blade. Suddenly, a soldier throws his body at the boss. There was Jummo, who asked if the corporal was alright, though he had been grazed in one of his eyes. The boy tries to help him while the kobold watches them from within the poison mist. Suddenly, the monster's mask starts to burn. Gathering the last of his strength, the protagonist orders Jummo to run. Confused, he asks what's going on and urges Hyeonuk to put on the mask. However, the boy's head is detached. Desperate, the corporal screams for his soldier. But returning to the present moment, Jummo is standing in front of the protagonist, asking what it's all about. Looking at the boy, Hyeonuk says that in his past life, his subordinate died trying to save him from the kobolds. Some soldiers report that they'd just installed the sensors and ask for more. Mentally affirming that the real battle at this portal will happen in the rear guard, he calls Jummo's name again. The boy asks him to give the order, stating he will do whatever is necessary. Hyeonuk says he will send a signal to him later, after which he must gather the members of the squad and take them out of the operation area. The soldier is confused, not understanding what's going on. A truck drives through the streets at high speed. Startled, Jummo asks if this isn't military desertion. Calmly, the protagonist states no, saying it's a military tactic. The soldiers were conducting a sweep of the city, searching for survivors and monsters. They also report that the estimated number of kobolds is 200. They were entering a large area of magic. The person in charge of the operation gives the command. Responding to their leader, all the soldiers quickly enter the warehouse. They say that the infiltration at Point P is complete and that the formation must be strengthened. With that, the control tower gives the command for the attack squad to release the magic circle. The shield bearers form a kind of cage while the magic circles are emitted above their heads. They are surrounded by kobolds who start moving toward them. The monsters scream as they advance to attack. A horde of dozens, therefore, some curved weapons are launched toward the squad. The leader tells everyone to wait as the monsters decrease the distance between them. He maintains the order to wait. Finally releasing them to attack, all the soldiers begin to strike, while the magic circles release fire. Thanks to this tactic, they are able to incinerate several monsters at once. The protagonist is still coordinating his squad, urging them to move faster. Zones 2 and 5 have all the sensors installed. He marks an X with tape on the ground. Lieutenant Minnie approaches, asking what Hyeonuk is doing. He greets him, saying he is fixing the motion sensors according to the manual. Marking the location with aluminum tape, the lieutenant calls it a trash job. The members of the Blue Flower Guild are still preventing people from entering the city. He tells the protagonist to stop acting like a fool because of a kobold portal. The guy says that the first platoon will begin the operation in 20 minutes and that they are the support team, so they should just pick up the detoxifiers. Seriously, the protagonist states that the mission assigned to the support squad by the platoon's vice commander is to prevent the monsters that manage to escape from the rear guard of the civil area. Looking around, the lieutenant becomes uncomfortable. Irritated, he says that this is serious. He asked if Hyeonuk has forgotten his place after the battalion commander showed some gratitude toward him. While pushing the protagonist's helmet, he says that this is the guy in the barracks right now, but the protagonist says his name. Touching his helmet again, the lieutenant says he only has one portal with real experience. Irritated, Hyeonuk repeats his name again. Minnie asks if Hyeonuk dares to teach him, telling him to take that look off his face. A subordinate runs over to them, asking them to stop. The girl tells the second platoon leader that there is something urgent. He realizes it's the vice leader of the platoon and asks her what's wrong. Mentally, the protagonist assumes this is why he provoked him to come here. She is the lieutenant's weak point. The guy starts saying he was there helping the support squad. The scoundrel asks what she's doing there. Seonha informs him that the battalion commander is calling for soldier Hyeonuk. Even the protagonist is surprised by this. After some time, a woman with red hair is on top of a building while observing the city. With her is a sniper. They are watching two people. It is Seonha with Hyeonuk. She asks him not to let the leader of the second platoon affect him, but he says that he still has work to do. The girl says she will finish setting up the sensors and asks him to go to the commander. The protagonist just nods. Observing the situation, he realizes that he doesn't have much time left, and he wonders what the battalion commander is planning. A soldier asks Yoonha if it's alright for her squad to stay there. The woman confirms that it's a direct order from the commander. She also says that being a soldier means following the orders they receive. In the temporary command post, the commander greets Hyeonuk. Both he and Myongo are staring at the protagonist. next. Confused, Hyunwook wonders what the first lieutenant is doing there, and why he's gathered with the battalion commander. The commander says that he will replace Yeonjun, who is currently on leave, and will lead the first attack platoon against the portal. Losing his mind internally, the protagonist says that the commander never paid attention to him in his past life and questions why this is happening now. Nervous, he assumes he doesn't have time for this and needs to get organized. He calls for the second lieutenant. Hyunwook says that he has only commanded the support squad since entering the base and that this would put the entire platoon at risk. Still inside the temporary control station, Kang-seok looks coldly and says that this is an order. The protagonist can do nothing but lament. Suddenly, Team Delta reports that the boss has left the Cobalt nest and asks the groups in zones 2 and 3 to remain on alert. Apprehensive, Hyunwook realizes that his squad will be attacked soon, and if he doesn't act quickly, the entire rear guard will be wiped out. Grinding his teeth, he decides that he needs to leave as quickly as possible, at any cost. Suddenly, he tells the commander that he has something to say. Staring at him, Kang-seok tells him to go ahead. The protagonist remains silent for a moment. Yoonha is still observing the protagonist's squad. She notices him running through the alleys. The girl is confused by this behavior. He desperately runs as fast as he can. The protagonist shouts for the support squad, telling them to put on their gas masks. At this moment, a loud noise is heard. The sensors begin to beep uncontrollably. Everyone present is extremely frightened. The poison, just like in his past, starts leaking through the sewers. Hyunwook gets caught in the explosions. Seeing everything covered by the poisonous mist, he begins to rage. Covering his mouth and nose, the protagonist admits that it happened faster than he remembered. Going back a bit in the past during his conversation with the battalion commander. After the commander asked him to finish saying what he wanted, Hyunwook says that he heard rumors that on Kang-seok's first mission, he lost his entire platoon. The first lieutenant is shocked to hear this. The protagonist says that's why he doesn't believe Kang-seok is ordering him to lead an attack platoon, being the corporal of the useless group. With that, he asks if the commander considers him and the other regular soldiers disposable. Kang-seok denies it, saying it's a misunderstanding and that his personal attack squad will follow him. But the protagonist interrupts, saying that if it's to follow an order from him, he would give his own life. Twisting inside, Hyunwook feels frustrated that he can't tell him that he knows about the future. The protagonist continues, saying that if he commands any platoon other than his own, there is a very high chance of casualties, saying that he is grateful for the expectations the commander has for him. But if this costs the lives of his comrades, he will disobey. Kang-seok remains silent with a dark expression. The first lieutenant tells him that disobedience during wartime is a military crime. Inside, Hyunwook screams that he knows, but if he doesn't act now, the entire rear guard will be dead. After a pause of a few seconds, the commander says it's fine and that he should continue with the original support mission. Even the protagonist is surprised by such a reaction, but he says he has a condition. Kang-seok says that as a true soldier, he will have to face the consequences of disobeying a direct order. Returning to the present moment, the area is completely covered in poison. Hyunwook tries to find his squad. He quickly puts on his mask. While securing it on his face, he continues cursing, irritated by his delay. Using his inventory pouch, he grabs the Blade of Clouds. Pouring water from his canteen onto the sword, the system identifies that 25% of its capacity has been absorbed. The protagonist realizes that he can't see anything due to the gas and wonders if he arrived too late. Looking through the thick poisonous mist, mentally, he prays that Jumno managed to gather everyone and escape. However, someone was being attacked by one of the monsters. The man screamed as he was pierced by the kobold's pickaxe. He cries out asking for Jumbo's help. The boy sees the situation, surprised. He quickly positions his weapon to defend his comrade. While cursing the monster, the soldier fires, trying to push it away from the injured man. The monster, seeing that it was being attacked, stops striking the man. It leaps into the mist. The soldier places his hand on the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Jumbo tells everyone to get behind the barricade and bring Minte with them. One of them says that they secured the safety of the injured soldier. He drags Minte while leaving a trail of blood on the ground. The platoon vice leader is in complete shock. The boy tells her to regain her composure. Seeing the woman's situation, he understands that it's normal since she's barely 20 years old. While trembling, Jumbo says that besides that, it's her first real mission after the approval. He assumes that he can do nothing for his comrades in such a war. The soldiers inform Jumbo that they are running out of ammo and they are down to their last magazine. Nervous, the boy begins to question what he should do and whether they have any chance of survival. At that moment, he wonders what the corporal would do in such a situation. One of the soldiers says that Minte needs medical help and asks the vice leader to go to them. Someone starts using their inventory backpack. The troops shout desperately, informing that they are out of ammo. Jumbo had grabbed a hammer in his hands. He shouts that now is the chance for the support team. The boy says that kobolds are attracted to shiny things, so he will draw their attention away. He orders all members of the platoon to leave with Shanha. The girl, confused, asks what he is planning. Raising his hammer, Jumbo says that this is his order as the vice leader of the squad, stating that the blue flower is out of the evacuation zone. Therefore, when he gives the signal, everyone must run for their lives. He assumes that his electrical power is pathetic, pathetic, but he can use it to save these people's lives. Determined, he runs while raising his hammer. The monsters, seeing that, become extremely focused on the light. All the kobolds run after him, leaving the battlefield to chase him. He shouts that this is everyone's chance, telling them to run. The soldiers shout his name as they watch him. The monsters approach him. Jumbo tells everyone that if the corporal were there, he would use his pathetic power for this, and that he would definitely use him as bait. Suddenly, the protagonist's bayonet cuts through all the monsters chasing him. It was so fast that even Jumbo loses his balance slightly. He bangs his head into Hyunwook. The protagonist curses him, saying he heard everything. He was raising his sword. The system notifies that his cloud was purifying the toxic gas as it spread, with a 100% absorption rate. He remains silent as he uses the ability of his blade. Falling to the ground, the boy is surprised by the corporal's return. Unexpectedly, Hyunwook says his name. Crying, Jumbo says that he was only imitating him and that he had always been carried by the protagonist. With a smile, he thanks the boy for staying alive, saying that he did a great job. Jumbo can't hold it in and starts crying. The kobolds continue advancing toward them. The protagonist admits that he is truly proud of his subordinate, and that thanks to his incredible courage, he will be able to enjoy this feast. With a sadistic look, Hyunwook shouts that since a beautiful meal has been prepared for him, he will devour everything eagerly. He begins to manipulate his bayonet while using the Cloud Blade's ability. The protagonist executes several cuts on the monsters' bodies. Without even moving, he kills all the kobolds approaching them. Essence crystals fall to the ground like an endless fountain. He remains silent again. The bipolar man starts laughing, saying that this is delicious. Jumbo asks if he's talking about the monsters. Afraid, the kobolds stop attacking. Looking at his subordinate, the protagonist realizes that he can't eat the crystals because of him. The monsters, with a certain level of fear, are just standing there watching Hyunwook. Confused, the protagonist asks where their leader is. The pentagrams on the monsters' foreheads begin to glow. The protagonist's attention is drawn in one direction. Not unlike him, the kobolds also look in the same direction. Hyunwook says that he can't believe it, while Jumbo doesn't understand what's happening. They hear an extremely loud scream. Leaving them confused, the monsters turn their backs and run in the direction of the screams. The protagonist also runs, shouting that the members of the squad are in danger. The commander's emergency squad remained on top of a building, noting that the situation was very complex because of the mist. The lieutenant orders the attack squad and the blue flower to destroy all the monsters that come out of the poison. One of the soldiers asks why these orders are being given and if she's going somewhere. Yuma notices that the corporal acted as if he knew this would happen, telling her comrade that she needs to confirm a few things. With that, she leaps into the poison zone. The platoon vice leader was begging for someone to save her. One of the soldiers was trying to keep Minte alive while shouting for Shionha to compose herself and help. Many members of the squad were injured. They realized that the barricade is being broken. Those who were still partially able to move tried to hold the barrier, noticing that the boss was trying to take it. The monster was using a spell to draw it towards him. His head was on fire as he tried to remove the protection from the soldiers. They realized that the kobold has breached the protective barrier. Still trying to hold the barricade, they realized the monsters are coming toward them. The creatures were coming quickly while raising their weapons. Unfortunately, they accept that this will now be the end for all of them. Suddenly, something catches the boss' attention. The protagonist runs while calling for the monster. He curses all of them, calling them filthy rats. While using his seal manipulation, Hyunwook orders them not to touch that. The blade comes toward the boss's head. The monster cancels his magic while dodging the attack. However, to his surprise, the dagger makes a sharp curve. The boss begins to dodge while trying to escape. He realizes that with every moment, the blade gets closer. Leaping again, he manages to evade. With some difficulty, he regains his balance. The boss realizes that his vase was cracked. Irritated, he glares at the protagonist while the flames on his head disappear. The pentagrams on the other kobolds' foreheads begin to glow. They start to scatter. Hyunwook is surprised by this. In an instant, all the monsters leap in different directions. They take distance from the protagonist. They begin to use a type of blowgun. Several darts fly toward him and Jumbo. Using his cloud blade, he parries all the attacks. To his surprise, they also attack from the other side, leaving the boy defenseless. Desperately, Hyunwook orders his subordinate to duck. He does as ordered. The protagonist uses his metal control ability, deflecting all the darts. He uses the thorns against the kobolds themselves, but he loses control and his bayonet. It falls beside the boss. The kobold looks directly at the protagonist. Hyunwook says that this is not the real boss. He is just the dark mage while shooting with his weapon and controlling his cloud blade. Noticing that the mage is literally controlling his own kind, or rather, it's useless to scare them. He admits that it's very dangerous to fight with Jumbo by his side. The protagonist orders the boy to run to the protection box. They run while trying to survive. The monsters use their blowguns again. The corporal and his subordinate were already approaching the barricade. Once again, the darts fly toward them, but this time they are coming from behind. He uses his metal manipulation ability again, deflecting the attacks. Just like Jumbo, he jumps into the barrier. Another dart tries to hit him, but it's stopped by the barricade. Seeing this, the boss stands still, glaring at the protagonist as he purifies everything around him. The monster growls as it looks at him. With a mocking smile, Hyunwook says it's a little late, but at least they managed to arrive. Turning his gaze back to the barrier, he sees the situation of his soldiers. Everyone is extremely happy to see their corporal. Jumbo says that Mintu lost consciousness. He asks what the boy is talking about since the person who can fix this was already there. However, Seoma was completely terrified, curled up and trembling in a corner. Angry, he asks what the girl is doing since one of the soldiers is dying. Realizing that Seonha is in a panic attack, he doesn't know what to do since she's the only healer they have. Realizing that at this rate they will be annihilated, he speaks to the vice leader, calling her Sergeant Seonha. For a moment, she snaps out of it. After she regains her senses, the girl looks confused at the corporal. In front of her, Hyunwook was clearly not happy. In a calm but stern manner, the protagonist asks if she wants everyone to die, telling Seonha to regain her composure. He asks Seonha if it isn't difficult to live a life full of regrets. A golden light shaped like chains begins to rise above the barricade. The girl was using her ability to heal one of her companions. The protagonist asks the vice leader of the platoon how the young man is doing. The woman replies that he has lost a lot of blood due to her delay. However, she assures him that she will not give up on him. Smiling, the corporal thanks her. Using steel manipulation, he says he will borrow the daggers of his comrades. Jumno asks if their leader really intends to do that. Irritated, Hyunwook responds that he will logically return them. Someone inside a luxury car says they understand, noticing that some very entertaining things are happening. A woman ends the call. On her shoulder was a large spider. She says that apparently she will have to make a visit to console herself. With that, the woman instructs the driver to head to Itaewon. Back at the location where Hyunwook and his team were, the corporal was walking through the poisonous smoke. He sees the X mark he had made earlier with the tape. As the monsters glare at him, the protagonist begins spinning the blades around him. The boss watches from behind cover. As pentagrams glow on the foreheads of the kobolds, the monsters charge at him. Hyunwook raises the cloud blade, still controlling the other daggers and looking downward. He notices that his prey has come alone to the perfect hunting ground, questioning whether he is losing his sanity. Using this place as a central mark, he had set up boxes and sensors in strategic locations. The corporal asserts that it will all end as soon as he gets his hands on the leader of the monsters, but one truly controlling everything behind the scenes. Thus, he uses his metal detection ability, scanning everything made of steel around him. Declaring that all metals he cannot recognize within the area must be their weapons, he begins locating them. Finally, he finds the boss. With that, the corporal launches the blades at him. Activating his metal control ability, a notification informs him that he can currently control 2 kilos and 959 grams. The kobold boss notices this and becomes alert. The knives cut through many of the monsters along the way. Some manage to dodge, while others don't even have time to react. One of the blades gets close to the boss. The creature immediately begins preparing a spell to stop it. A kind of dark energy attempts to envelop the blade. He actually manages to stop it using this power. The protagonist observes and finally locks onto the boss. Thus, he begins using his ability to try and strike him. The kobold realizes that he barely managed to stop one blade, but many others are already approaching. The monster lets out a scream as if summoning something. At this moment, Hyunwook is startled. The boss managed to stop all his attacks by summoning a slightly greater power. The kobold glares at the corporal with extreme rage. Unexpectedly, the protagonist extends his arm and clenches his fist. Cursing the monster, Hyunwook demands that it return his bayonets, trying to pull him back with his ability. However, the system warns him that his daggers are being affected by a weight beyond their capacity. Suddenly, the symbol above the monster's heads glows even brighter. They grab their blowguns and start firing at their adversary. The protagonist panics, realizing he is defenseless. The corporal quickly turns, trying to shield his face. His arms are completely struck by the majority of the darts. The kobolds watch as the man kneels on the ground. With that, his ability is deactivated and the blades begin to fall to the floor. Seeing this, the boss deactivates his power as well. Quickly, he points at Hyunwook, commanding his subordinates. All of them rush for their enemy with bloodlust. The corporal's arms were completely pierced. Gritting his teeth, he mutters that the boss almost made him think everything was over, just like in his past life. Rising to his feet, the protagonist shakes his arms, causing all the darts to fall out. He admits that if it weren't for his body transformation, this would have been his end, frightening the monster boss. The bayonets rise toward Hyunwook. All of them begin spinning like a propeller. In a threatening manner, he curses the kobolds. A horde of them was charging at him while his blades flew toward him. The boy swings his arms, commanding them all to die. With that, many of them are cut down by the bayonets. As they spun, they inflicted much more damage on their enemies. Alongside the Cloud Blade's ability, a massive cutting tornado was formed. The attack was so powerful that it cleared the entire area of the poisonous gas. The corporal remained standing there. Likewise, the boss was also paralyzed, but in his case it was due to fear and shock. Seeing this, the protagonist calls out to the kobold Dark Mage. Moving his hand, he declares that it is time to settle the score. The monster growls upon seeing that he is still alive. The kobold causes more poison to flow from the jar on his back. A massive poison explosion occurs, generating a large whirlwind. Even with the protagonist using his cloud blade, he could barely stay on his feet. The corporal says that fighting is useless, questioning whether the kobold knows how hard he worked to ensure only he remained. Hyunwook activates his metal detection ability. Thus, the corporal is able to ignore the poisonous cloud and see through objects containing iron around him. He says that throwing Throwing the daggers at the monster again will only result in them being caught, deciding to attack cautiously. The corporal identifies the boss thanks to a piece of metal in his hand. However, he becomes confused as the kobold is no longer moving. When he opens his eyes, he sees a type of root heading toward him. The dark mage is stationary, needing to keep his hand in contact with the ground to use his magic. Because of this, he manages to grab one of the protagonist's legs, pulling him toward himself. The monster continues growling as he watches his defenseless enemy. He lifts Hyunwook, preparing to throw him, raising him above the poison level. Then the monster hurls him upward. Afterward, he is pulled down and released into the air. He crashes to the ground, causing a tremendous impact. For a moment, the area falls into absolute silence. The monster begins to undo his magic. Standing up, the kobold starts laughing, convinced of his victory. Shocking the boss, the protagonist calls him a rat. Still recovering from the fall, Hyunwook asks if that vermin truly dares to laugh. The corporal had used body fortification to withstand the fall with his legs. In a terrifying tone, the protagonist asks how many times that monster will make him relive flashbacks of his past life. Becoming irritated again, the dark mage positions himself to attack. In the blink of an eye, he vanishes from in front of his opponent. The protagonist's eye begins emitting a blue ray. The monster is running swiftly among supply crates and trucks. In an instant, he is already behind the corporal. Quickly, the monster tries to strike the protagonist with his blade. However, Hyunwook manages to dodge with some difficulty. He immediately steadies himself on the ground again. Visibly enraged, the man asks if that insect truly tried to hit him from behind, questioning whether the mage knows how much he despises those who strike from behind. Furious, he attacks the monster with a cloud blade. The creature seems surprised by something. The protagonist uses body transformation in one of his legs, landing a powerful kick to the monster's face. He declares that the creature needs a beating. The monster is flung far away, bouncing across the ground from the impact, unable to stop. As he heads toward him, the protagonist says he has been eagerly waiting for vengeance ever since his return. The kobold looks at him, trying to get up, while the corporal says the creature should feel honored, as he will be the first to fall. Smiling, Hyunwook notes that with that broken mask, the kobold can no longer use his magic, saying it's time to settle a score. The boss screams in despair as the psychopath's bayonets fly toward him from behind. He is completely shredded by all of them, pierced as they spin. The leader's blade falls to the ground, signaling his defeat. The jar he carried, the source of the poison, falls and shatters into pieces. The protagonist mocks the monster, asking if he is a weakling and whether he is already dying. Suddenly, he grabs the monster by the mouth. Raising his blade, he questions whether the kobold knows how long he was crippled because of him. He declares that now he will die, pierced by the blades of his men, those the monster had killed in his past life. Recalling Jomo's final moments, he declares this as vengeance for his subordinate who tried to save his life. Finally, he plunges the blade into his enemy's chest. The boss tries to grab it, but an energy begins to emanate from the sword. It is notified that the cloud blade is absorbing the blood of an elite monster, filling with an unknown energy. The creature continues struggling to remove it while murmuring in pain. Using his metal control ability, Hyunwook tells him not to die yet, as there is still something he needs to do. The blade moves toward the monster's head, increasing his desperation. Assuring that this is vengeance for the scar left on his former face, he forces the dagger downward. It slowly pierces the monster's skull, slicing through the middle of his head. When the screams finally stop, the creature lies dead on the ground with a cloud blade embedded in his chest. It is stated that after absorbing the unknown energy, some latent powers of the sword will be unlocked. He sighs, realizing he has finally reversed the first event of the past that haunted him. The poisonous cloud still lingers in the area. Suddenly, a kind of medallion falls from the monster's body. The protagonist is shocked to see it. It was the devil's medallion, granting the power of the demon race, specifically the Hellfire. Seeing this, Hyunwook wonders why it appeared there. The medallion belonged to a certain individual. The name Infernal Medallion was given because of the undead army considered humanity's hell, the worst villain of mankind, the Necromancer. There is no information about him except his growth trait, similar to the protagonist's. In his past life, he barely managed to finish the battle at the Blue Lava Golem's workshop, collecting only one Inferno relic. He questions why the true medallion is there at that moment. Angry, the corporal realizes there is more he doesn't yet understand. He notices the poisonous gas is dissipating. As he asserts that he needs to consume the medallion, someone suddenly calls his name. The protagonist freezes in a mix of fear and shock. Behind him stood Yuna, pointing her sword and demanding to know who he really was. Hyunwook turns to her, mentally lamenting how much she saw. Suddenly, the woman with the spider on her shoulder appears. She remarks that the battle was impressive. Introducing herself, she says her name is Catherine, leader of Seoul's Blue Flower Guild's attack unit, returning to the moment when the lieutenant questions him. The protagonist quickly hides the medallion in his back pocket using his manipulation ability. Awkwardly, Hyunwook asks what she's talking about. After that, Catherine appears, surprising them both. Still wearing her mask, the woman says she saw the fight from afar and was impressed nonetheless. She asks Yoonhide if she's not the third daughter of the captain of the Paladins, remarking that she's grown a lot. The protagonist is surprised and slightly irritated as well. Yoonha introduces herself as the captain of the 1st Battalion of the 3rd Brigade, stating that the area is restricted restricted for civilians. However, Catherine simply ignores her and approaches the corporal. She introduces herself and hands him a card. This was the second daughter of the leader of South Korea's most powerful guild, Blue Flower, and an A-rank player. Hana is confused when she notices Hyunwook doesn't even take the card. Astonished, the woman asks if he doesn't know who is standing before him. Biting his lip, he wonders how he couldn't know. After all, out of all the villains who annihilated humanity, he couldn't forget her even if he tried. He remembers Yuna protecting him, telling him he must survive. The protagonist tells her to get out of his way, while the woman claims she'll be his shield, stating that she would die first if necessary. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. As Yuna's body was covered by insects, someone floated under the red moonlight. She had been killed by Hana. Returning to the present, Catherine asks if he doesn't realize this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in front of him. Hyunwook clenches his fists and begins trembling. The lieutenant repeats that this is a military operation zone, ordering the woman to leave. Taking a deep breath, irritated by so many interruptions, Catherine says that soldiers should address each other by rank, telling Yuna to refer to her as the department chief of the Blue Flower Guild. Seeing both women staring at each other hostilely, the protagonist admits this is very uncomfortable for him. To everyone's surprise, a car approaches. An army jeep drives toward them. After it stops, someone exits the vehicle. Hyuna says she was going to report the situation to the battalion commander. However, Kang-sok tells her to wait. The commander begins scanning the area, noticing several dead kobolds scattered on the ground. Even the boss had a blade embedded in its chest. Becoming increasingly nervous about the situation, the protagonist mentally declares that this is the end for him. Kang-sok stares at the corporal with an extremely serious expression. Hyunwook holds onto his soul, which feels like abandoning him, thinking he must handle this alone. The commander expresses pleasure at seeing Hana again, and she asks how Kang-sok has been. He says he's grateful for the guild's help, but since this is a military operation area, unauthorized entry is unacceptable. She comments that typical soldiers are too rigid, saying she almost got what she wanted. The woman kisses her business card and then places it on the corporal's vest, asking if it isn't true and telling him to call her. However, the commander calls out to the protagonist, prompting him to salute. He declares that from now on, the boy is the squad commander for this operation and orders him to prioritize rescuing survivors. Hyunwook wonders what that guy is thinking. And after resolving this situation, he must report everything personally to the major lieutenant. The corporal accepts the mission. With a grim expression, Yuna looks at him. The protagonist is genuinely frightened by her gaze. 1 week after the incident with the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Battalion, it's reported that the absorption of the infernal medallion is complete. He can now manipulate 3 kilograms and 458 grams of metal. Inside the men's restroom, a notification window warns that a fire breath chamber is forming in his stomach, cautioning that the user might feel immense pain. Someone enters the restroom calling for the corporal. Jumbo asks what Hyunwook is looking at so intently to be making those noises. Still literally spitting fire, the protagonist says it's not what Jumbo thinks. The boy asks if he can show him later while Hyunwook practically turns into a lamp. His subordinate is stunned outside seeing that light. The Cobalt portal, which everyone had underestimated, caused many casualties. But thanks to Seonha, the soldier Mintit recovered from his critical condition and was safely transported to the military hospital. After the incident, Hyunwook decided to stop doing everything alone and instead train his team members so that they can at least defend themselves. He remarks that this decision brought him 2 problems as Seonha greets him. The first was that the surgeon started pestering him much more since that day. The girl calls out to him again, prompting the protagonist to ask what the platoon vice leader wants. Lieutenant Minhee observes them furiously. Additionally, the second problem. The commander asks him to leave his current role and become a non-commissioned officer. This didn't even surprise him anymore. Kang-shuk had said the Itaewon operation convinced him of Hyunwook's potential and his dream of fostering a military culture where ranks don't matter, as per his warrior's belief. Hyunwook says he'll think about it during his vacation while internally going mad, wondering if that brute is crazy. After 3 weeks, the day of his vacation finally arrives. Another guy is shocked in the bathroom, seeing a bright light coming from one of the stalls. The system congratulates Hyunwook, saying he's fulfilled the special conditions to gain a new ability. He's acquired the Fire Breath Chamber, which boosts absorption by 50 to 250% and grants the ability to spit fire. The protagonist sits, noting that he can finally put an end to the strange rumors about him spending too much time in the bathroom. After some time, he's looking at himself in the mirror, admitting that with his current state, he might not be able to handle the next portal. The commander faces a crowd of people asking if he'll abandon the Seoul station in the end. They demand the authorities clarify their position, questioning if they'll truly save those people. Meanwhile, at the station, a crowd screams for help as blood spreads. The protagonist realizes he could truly die in this situation. For this reason, he needs to prepare thoroughly during his vacation because it's time to change the future. Elsewhere, the platoon vice leader lights a cigarette, noting it's been a long time since she took a vacation. As she struggles with her lighter, Seonha wonders what's wrong with it. She and Hyunwook lock eyes, leaving both surprised by such an encounter. The woman asks if he has a lighter. She mentally notes that she has unintentionally revealed her true personality. Sometime later, already on the train, Seonha is sitting beside the protagonist. Both of them feel a certain discomfort. The platoon vice leader glances at him and asks if this is his first vacation, commenting that his parents must be happy to have him back. Startling her, Hyeonuk says that everyone in his family died when he was young. The girl feels embarrassed and guilty for having brought it up. The protagonist notices her reaction. He tries to lighten the mood, saying that although it was lonely at first, he found people he could consider as family. Seona becomes curious about this. Recalling his past life, he remembers when his battalion praised him. Lost in thought, Hyeonuk wonders if they are his friends, colleagues, or comrades in arms. With a faint smile, he concludes that comrades in arms seems like the right term. He gets off at Yeongdong Post Station. The protagonist mentions that he has 4 days and 3 nights to prepare for the future, and the first step is to make money. He looks at a billboard next to him, noticing that the owner of Blue Tree is already a multimillionaire at this point. Still staring at the advertisement, Hyeonuk reflects that Gordon moves his dirty money through the underworld, buying influential people, players, and powerful items. Through this, he gradually took control of all the networks. In other words, the biggest reason for his own defeat was money. Even though it's practically impossible to have the same amount as Gordon, Hyeonuk wants to have enough to avoid getting caught up in his games. The protagonist knows about future important events and where money will accumulate. Therefore, if he invests before others, a small sum will snowball into something massive. But he needs someone who won't betray him. For that, he must trust someone loyal and faithful, even to the smallest promises. Nearby, someone is arguing, saying they don't have the money and asking not to be forced into a being. A man is grabbing another by his shirt, telling him he just needs to take more work. The man with white hair protests that being a guard at an event is a cursed job, claiming it's humiliating. They notice the protagonist's presence greeting him. The man with white hair remarks that it's been a long time since he last saw the Tin Can controller. Hyeonuk recalls their first meeting. Wonchul had said he was also an awakened individual, claiming it was a pleasure to meet him. The small protagonist also expressed happiness in meeting him. Returning to the present moment, he wonders aloud if their relationship is really so good that it's nice to see each other. Walking past the man, the protagonist greets the other guy, noting that it's been a while. The chubby guy asks why Hyeonuk is there. Wonchul wonders if Hyeonuk has lost his mind, saying he must have thrown away his memories just for greeting him kindly. Angry, he says maybe he should refresh the boy's memory about their real relationship. The protagonist recalls a past memory of levitating some small objects with his power. The kids around him demanded he do something more, claiming even they might awaken like that. Wonchul had said he wasn't awakened, calling him a loser. Because of this, the boy let the objects fall. But what caused it was a punch he received to the face. The protagonist had taken a blow from that delinquent. Wonchul said that if Hyeonuk ever claimed to be awakened again, he would kill him. And just like back then, the boy was getting ready to hit him. Currently, Wonchul is ranked C in the fighter category. Wonchul asks if he should beat him just like in school. The chubby guy tries to stop him, but Wonchul insists he'll make the boy beg for his life, just like old times. He tells the other man to leave the room if he doesn't want to die along with the protagonist. To their surprise, Hyeonuk challenges Wonchul to land a hit on him. With a terrifying look, the corporal tells him to try killing him if he can. Furious with rage, Wonchul starts cursing as he charges toward him. He tries to punch the protagonist, who remains rooted to the spot. Suddenly, he stops his arm, causing a slight wind to form around his opponent. A pen, controlled by the protagonist, had stopped inches from Wonchul's eye. Another knife hovered near his ankle. In reality, countless blades were aimed at his body. Hyeonuk states that while he might not win today, he will make Wonchul feel as if an entire military unit is attacking him. In short, he could end his life as easily as a close combat player could. Seeing the weapons inching closer, Wonchul grows nervous. Another person enters the room, calling for Wonchul and saying they need to leave immediately to get to the event. Confused, Wonchul sees all the blades dropping to the floor and asks what's going on. The protagonist starts shouting, asking for mercy and promising to be more careful next time. Out of nowhere, Hyeonuk hugs him. He starts mentioning how his poor friend was expelled from White Tiger for wetting his pants and fleeing during the first mission. This triggers a memory of Wonchul running away and abandoning his teammates. Angrier than ever, Wonchul demands to know how Hyeonuk knows about that. Hyeonuk casually mentions having a big mouth and asks if Wonchul is going to fight an F rank in front of everyone he knows. Threateningly, he whispers that he will preserve the face Wonchul takes so much pride in, but in return, he must disappear. Later, still in the Hope Guild, 3 recruitment cards are spread on a table. The chubby guy asks the protagonist if those actions will really skyrocket that much, surprised by the numbers. Hyeonuk remains silent, merely observing. Eventually, he confirms that it's all true, making the man say it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. At the event, they wonder how long they'll have to stay on guard duty, questioning if they shouldn't try entering a portal at least once. The guy who had entered the room earlier asks Wonchul what happened to him earlier. An older man arrives, yelling at them and asking why they're causing trouble there. Stopping in front of the protagonist's acquaintance, the man asks if he's the leader here. The older man says he had assigned zones A, B, C, and D, adding that if the guy can't read, he should at least work on his hearing. However, the madman simply punches him. The blow lands on the older man's jaw, sending him flying backward. His subordinate looks utterly shocked by this. Completely losing it, Wonchul lands multiple blows on the fallen man. Blood and fragments of asphalt fly into the air. This horrifies all of his companions, who are stunned by the scene. Getting up, Wonchul orders everyone to spread out and look for a man. Completely unhinged, he declares that he's going to kill Hyunwook. Hyolsu was extremely surprised. If those stocks truly soared with those numbers, it would change their lives forever. He apologized to the protagonist, admitting it was hard to believe. Mentally, Hyunwook understood why it might seem unbelievable. Hyolsu then asked if they might have provided that information as a way to exploit him. Hyunwook asked if the guild leader considered him trustworthy based on what he'd seen so far. Hyolsu replied logically, stating he did indeed trust him. Unable to explain that the source of his knowledge came from his past life, Hyunwook simply reaffirmed that everything was true. He showed Hyolsu his conversation with the battalion commander, where they discussed a vacancy for a non-commissioned officer. Hyolsu asked if that was real. Hyunwook confirmed, adding that he'd like to entrust his money to him, handing over a card and stating it contained 20 million won left by his parents. The guild leader noted that the protagonist genuinely seemed to trust him. Hyunwook recalled how, in his past life, this man had comforted him when he lost his friends. The man had told him that everyone has talents, but the difference was that his talents were now being called superpowers. He had encouraged him not to blame himself and to live until those talents, unrecognized as superpowers, became valuable. Now this investment was a way to repay his brother for his kindness. He had been the only one to welcome him in his past life. Suddenly, a massive ship appeared in the sky above the city. Hyunwook explained that in the future, humanity would encounter beings from another world who could communicate with them. The technology gained from these interactions would become a turning point in the War of the Portals. As such, his abilities would be essential in stopping the gates and the waves to come. He needed a specialist who could communicate with those otherworldly beings and transfer their technology to him. In the blacksmith's alley of Yeongdeunpo, Hyunwook asked a man how much a man of stone cost. His second step toward preparing for the future was meeting 7 dwarf craftsmen and creating his first master-grade item. One of his companions, Wonchul, was watching Hyunwook as he searched for blacksmiths who had surpassed the standard and reached master level. Hyunwook entered a shop. The old man behind the counter told him he was only selling what was on the shelves and not to look anything else. This was Jangdu, an eccentric craftsman who had been expelled from the blacksmith guild due to his peculiar personality. Hyunwook noticed a weapon made of orichalcum. Although it looked rough, it would eventually become the dragon hunter's spear that would pierce the heart of the dragon Tarax. A girl entered the shop, remarking that it seemed like there was a poor person present. The old man scolded her for speaking that way to a customer. She retorted, saying Jangdu called them that as well, but she fell silent when she saw the protagonist. Hyunwook mentally recognized her, identifying her as a comrade in arms. This was Baksil. 4 years into the future, after the old craftsman's death, she would inherit all his skills and surpass her master. The girl scanned Hyunwook with her eyes, calculating the value of his clothes. Changing her attitude entirely, she politely asked what he'd like to purchase. Mentally, Hyunwook noted that her greed for money fit perfectly with the dwarf's personality. After selecting a few items, Baksil totaled the price at 18 million won, joking that he wasn't a customer, he was a mayor. The old man asked why Hyunwook was buying so many items if he wasn't even a mage who could use them. Baksil told her grandfather to shut up, saying Hyunwook must have use for them. Hyunwook complimented the products and assured them he'd return. As they bid farewell, Baksil encouraged him to come back any time. Remembering her tragic death, Hyunwook apologized internally, stating that unlike his other comrades, he truly needed her. This time, however, he promised to protect her. In front of the Grag Motel, that same man was standing next to a car, observing something with indifference. Hyunwook was holding one of the stones he had purchased, declaring that by the end of his vacation, he would significantly increase his resistance to poison and the amount of metal he could manipulate. The system notified him that it was absorbing an enchanted metal with poison, and that after absorption, his tolerance would increase slightly. Normally, this process would take the indicated time, but with his airspace, it would proceed faster. With the mineral inside his body, Hyunwook focused all of his flames on it. The stone began to melt, accelerating the absorption process. Using his internal furnace, his metal absorption speed increased by 250%. However, it inflicted severe pain. The system issued multiple alerts as his veins glowed a molten yellow like lava. Despite the agony, Hyunwook grew irritated, snapping at the system that he already knew. He told himself he didn't have much time and needed to consume it all and endure the pain. 2 days passed. One man told Wonchul that the kid hadn't left his room in days. Inside the motel room, one of the windows was open. The status window showed that level 2 poison resistance was being developed, along with 17 kilograms and 499 grams of manipulable metal. Around his body, traces of his manipulation power combined with his airspace ability formed a kind of electrical current. Hyunwook confesses that having level 2 resistance isn't as good as he had hoped. However, he is now able to manipulate around 60 daggers. The system notifies him that he has undergone his first latent breakthrough, acquiring the skill Metal Break. With this skill, he can disarm practically any equipment. That is sufficient for now. Suddenly, he senses something approaching the entrance. Turning to face it, he waits for his new opponent. Wonchul bursts through the door. He complains that the protagonist isn't even shocked, asking if he had been hiding there the whole time. Hyeonuk calmly replies that as a soldier there are numerous government restrictions on him, and asks Wonchul if he couldn't just leave. The man starts laughing, dismissing Hyeonuk's concerns as nonsense. With that, Wonchul charges at him, shouting, "Do you think you're going to die?" Throwing a punch at Hyeonuk's face, he yells at him to just die. However, Hyeonuk activates his body transformation. Wonchul is taken aback, startled by what he sees. Frightened, he asks, "What kind of body is that?" Hyeonuk suggests they take the fight elsewhere, pointing out that they'll both be caught in trouble if they continue there. Meanwhile, guests from other rooms start coming out, asking if the noise is coming from another portal. The man manages to free his hand, cursing at Hyeonuk and calling him a scrap heap. Angry, Wonchul asks how the brat dares to bluff against him as he prepares to land a kick. Dodging the attack, Hyeonuk responds, 2 days ago it might have been a bluff, but not anymore. Using his steel body, Hyeonuk counters with a strike to Wonchul's stomach. The man immediately screams in pain. Hyeonuk, with a cold tone, tells him he only wants to ask one question. He says that this isn't even close to the pain Wonchul inflicted on him in the past, demanding to know why he's going so far. Wonchul sneers, accusing Hyeonuk of arrogance just because he landed a hit. Using an ability in his leg, Wonchul warns Hyeonuk not to look at him with those eyes. A powerful vortex of air begins forming around Wonchul's leg, surprising even Hyeonuk. Hyeonuk yells at him again, asking if he hasn't realized that civilians are getting caught in the crossfire. Still enraged, Wonchul dismisses it, saying it has nothing to do with him. Hyeonuk watches in disbelief as the situation spirals further out of control. Realizing he is the target, Hyeonuk tries to think of a way to minimize the damage to the building. Deciding quickly, he heads toward the window. Wonchul shouts, demanding to know where he thinks he's running to. Hyeonuk leaps toward the window, attempting to escape to the outside. However, Wonchul unleashes his attack on Hyeonuk. The resulting explosion is powerful. Hyeonuk absorbs part of the impact, but it still throws him outside. The only damage to the building is the wall of his room, which is completely destroyed. Wonchul, in his frenzy, jumps out after him, declaring that he will kill him. He was still in the air, activating his steel body ability. Controlling the metal, he concentrated his power in his foot. Wonchul launched an attack mid-air. Hyeonuk responded by using a chain of abilities. Wonchul was surprised by the fact that Hyeonuk had changed his trajectory despite having no support. Thanks to his ability, the protagonist managed to evade the attacks and land on the other side. Although he couldn't fly like in his previous life, he could move by using body transformation and metal control abilities. Wonchul appeared above him, declaring that even if the military had given Hyeonuk some cheap tricks, they wouldn't be enough. The protagonist swiftly dodged using his ability, while his enemy's attack struck the ground with a thunderous impact. People began observing the fight, wondering if the commotion was caused by those players. Wonchul mocked him, asking if he would continue dodging like a rat. Extremely irritated, he demanded that Hyeonuk confront him directly. He began throwing a series of blows, trying to land a hit on the boy. The attacks were so powerful that they generated strong winds, lifting even nearby vehicles. People urged others not to go down to the first floor, saying they had already reported the situation. As a soldier, Hyeonuk couldn't retaliate with full force, nor could he involve civilians, as it might ruin his plan for the station portal. Wonchul quickly regained his footing on the ground. Meanwhile, the surrounding people were watching and filming the fight. Wonchul sneered, asking if Hyeonuk wasn't retaliating because of the eyes watching him, adding that they should get rid of the nuisance. He activated the power of his equipment once again. Hyeonuk opened his arms and shouted loudly, declaring there were innocent people in the building and that he couldn't destroy it. He firmly stated that these people had nothing to do with their fight. Wonchul dismissed this, claiming they were all garbage anyway. Charging at both Hyeonuk and the building, he roared in anger, commanding them to writhe in despair as they tried to stop him. Angry, Hyeonuk vowed to end his life as a player. A strange blue current formed in Hyeonuk's eye. This energy transformed into 2 circles, one above the other. Using this newfound power, he broke his opponent's equipment. As Wonchul attempted another attack, his armor began to buckle. Hyeonuk had activated his metal bending ability. Blood spilled everywhere. A scream of pain echoed throughout the building. Wonchul collapsed on the ground, trying to stop the bleeding in his leg. Terrified, he asked what Hyeonuk had done as he desperately tried to crawl away, pleading for him not to come closer. The protagonist coldly said he would ask one last time. Why was Wonchul going to such lengths? Wonchul sneered, replying that if an insect dared to sting him, he would obviously kill it. Hyeonuk stated that someone like him, who constantly displayed a superiority complex, didn't deserve to be a player. In his mind, Hyeonuk thought that people like Wonchul always ended up as villains. Wonchul, on the other hand, retorted that Hyeonuk wasn't all that powerful. Hyeonuk manipulated a piece of metal and positioned it behind Wonchul's neck. He warned him never to appear before him again, threatening that if it happened, he wouldn't just lose a leg. Wonchul was both furious and terrified at Hyeonuk's words. Grating his teeth, he growled that Hyeonuk should thank God he was a soldier, claiming he couldn't abandon his comrades. Not long after, the police arrived at the scene. In the awakened task force report, it was concluded that Hyeonuk had merely tried to stop Wonchul. An agent remarked that witness statements were consistent, adding that Hyeonuk was lucky since Wonchul was notorious for being problematic. The officer also noted that it was the first time in his life he'd seen a low-ranking official emerge unscathed from such a fight. Smiling, Hyeonuk replied that he got lucky because his enemy's Kauf armor ended up bursting. The officer said he would be released for now. Hyeonuk thought back to how he had always considered his F rank a terrible classification, but now he realized it had helped him avoid suspicion. Another officer approached, showing him some information and remarking that he might want to know about it. He revealed that the enemy's armor had no flaws. The officer added that it didn't make sense for an F rank to crush the armor of a C rank, let alone defeat them without sustaining any injuries. Outside, Hyeonuk prepared to run. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared from where he stood. Moving at incredible speed, he rushed past people, leaving only a strong wind in his wake. As he ran through the city, Hyeonuk recalled his past life. He remembered how the news reported that, aside from the first 3 waves, this was the greatest disaster ever witnessed. This tragedy had intensified expert criticism, raising questions about the portal response system. Unlike the 2 previous portals, Hyeonuk had no personal experience with this one, meaning unpredictable situations could arise. Among all the monstrous disasters, the Seoul Station incident was one of the worst. He wondered if he could really handle it with his current progress. Part of him considered staging a fake attack to evacuate the population. However, he knew he couldn't act rashly. As he looked back, something clicked in his mind. He remembered the presence of a hidden villain there. If things went wrong and he hid, Hyeonuk would never find the turning point to change the future. Standing still amidst the crowd, he realized there were only 2 minutes left until the portal opened. Suddenly, someone greeted him. It was the vice platoon leader, panting heavily, saying she had been looking for him for a long time. Furious, she scolded him for being at the police station and demanded to know why he hadn't answered his phone. Hyeonuk thought to himself that in his previous life, Sama wasn't there, wondering if he had changed the past so much. Now, with only a minute left until the world's worst portal opened, Seona continued scolding him. She exclaimed that even with his phone destroyed, he should have informed her about what had happened. Hyeonuk mentally noted that he had no time to waste and needed to proceed with his plan. As the moment arrived, Hyeonuk took off the large bag from his back. Seona flinched as he scattered several metal spheres on the ground. People at the station began questioning what was happening, some even asking if he was crazy. Seona, bewildered, asked what was going on. Frustrated that he wasn't answering her and was doing something so sudden. Unexpectedly, he told her to run toward the gas masks when he gave the signal. Confused, Seona struggled to understand what was happening. Meanwhile, the rest of the crowd grew angry at the spheres on the ground, which were obstructing their way. Suddenly, a massive wave of poison appeared. A hole in the ceiling began emitting venomous gas. The small hole expanded into a large portal. Seona looked on, perplexed by its sudden appearance. A monster with gleaming black scales emerged from it. The protagonist signaled Seona to head toward the gas masks. 2 women were talking in front of the station. One of them bids farewell, saying she needs to leave. The girl asks why the older woman wants her to leave, insisting she would accompany her to the train. Her mother replies that she just doesn't want her to get tired. The girl asks if she isn't sad, saying they don't even know when they will see each other again as a dark mass approaches. Suddenly, the black mass passes between them, forming a barrier and frightening the girl. She doesn't understand what just happened, as she was talking moments ago. Terrified, she calls out for her mother while a large black sphere forms a capsule, isolating the station. This was the misfortune event. You could enter the zone, but you couldn't leave. Everyone had to survive for 6 hours or kill a boss. Returning to the moment when the portal opened inside the station, the protagonist tells the girl to run to where the gas masks are. As the monster starts emerging from the portal, Hyeonuk also begins running, shouting at her to do as he said. The giant spider falls into the station, causing massive destruction to the floor. People begin running frantically while the monster screams. The crowd panics, running so chaotically that they trample each other. Unlike them, Hyeonuk moves toward the creature. He tells Seona to ensure of her own safety first and not to forget to grab a gas mask. Annoyed, she begins to protest, saying that she too is a soldier and has no intention of surviving alone. Even though she isn't a combatant, she will evacuate the civilians. She adds that she trusts him, which is why, as his platoon leader, she orders the corporal to survive at all costs. The protagonist gives a faint smile upon hearing this. Introducing himself as a corporal, he says he will follow her orders. An older man questions whether Kang-seok really wants to put so much trust in a rank F soldier. The commander responds that he doesn't believe in talent evaluations. The general appears visibly irritated, not liking what he just heard. The commander explains that rankings are based on the expected outcome of a trait, but undervalued individuals are dying. Jung-hyul asks if he's trying to teach teach him something. This was the general of the 3rd Brigade, ranked 31st in South Korea. The commander quickly denies it, saying that's not the case. The general retorts that all the veterans are moving to civilian guilds and asks who would volunteer if he promoted a rank of officer. He also questions what's wrong with the military system, claiming he could shout to the world that the AMT should be disbanded. Kang-suk remains silent, clearly uncomfortable with the reaction. Jung-cheol remarks that he understands if the commander saw something in that guy, but bug is still a bug. He then answers a call, asking what it is now. Someone informs him that they've received news of a portal opening at Seoul Station, a misfortune event. Both men look shocked by the news. Returning to the station interior, the guards are using their powers to try and stop the boss. One soldier asks the team leader what kind of spider monster this is, knowing he's never seen one like it in the field guide. The creature raises its leg to attack him. The officer freezes, unsure of how to react, while one of his teammates rushes to save him. The man manages to rescue his colleague just in time. Another soldier stumbles slightly as the monster slams its leg into the ground. After leaping to save his friend, they land a short distance from the attack. Manhua orders his soldiers to stop using fire attacks and switch to ice while he readies his shield and grabs a blade. Following his command, they switch to the freezing rune. He uses a skill called Eruption. With it, they manage to unleash a strong blast of ice against the creature. Thanks to this, the soldiers are able to immobilize the boss for a moment. The team leader, still trying to protect his fallen comrade, realizes the freeze won't last long. He knows he needs to take at least one of the monster's eyes while its legs are frozen. Manhua orders everyone to maintain the ice rune, saying he will attack himself. The team leader's sword glows as he launches himself toward the giant creature. The boss, initially focused on the fallen man, suddenly shifts its gaze to the soldier leaping toward it. The soldier shouts as he prepares to strike, but the giant spider breaks free of the ice, shaking off its restraints. It opens its mouth toward the man. Someone yells for him to use his shield. The leader complies, raising his shield as the protagonist's metallic spheres fly toward him. Using this momentum, Hyunwook propels the man backward, saving him just in time. The giant spider searches for the one who interfered. Standing among the spheres is Hyunwook, resembling Neo from the Matrix in his long coat. The protagonist begins moving toward the boss. As he prepares to attack, Hyunwook declares that there's no time for hesitation. He starts twisting the creature's carapace, stating this is the perfect time to test his abilities. The protagonist continues straining to crush the spider, while the system notifies him that his mana is depleting at an extremely rapid rate. The two energy spheres separate again in his eye as his mana drops to 76%. With this, he completely destroys the armored spider's core. The guard captain is utterly shocked by what just happened. The other soldiers share the same reaction, realizing that the attack is working. Mentally, Hyunwook assures himself that with this power, he will be able to stop the wave. He declares that he can't afford to stop now. To his surprise, the boss begins moving again. However, he declares that he will claim all the rewards for clearing this portal entirely for himself. The psychopath starts shouting at the monster, commanding it to use everything it has, vowing to crush and consume every last drop of its willpower. He uses his spheres to launch another attack. The protagonist taunts the spider, saying he wants to see if its insides are as tough as its steel-like exterior. With that, he creates an iron spiral with the spheres, causing the monster to scream in pain once again. He mockingly asks how it feels to have its insides ground up like in a blender. The boss roars in agony, visibly terrified. The giant spider collapses to the ground with a resounding crash. The guard captain is utterly horrified, witnessing the man single-handedly defeat the monster using only his ability. He remarks that despite having seen rank-up players in many portals, he has never encountered anyone so fearless. He wonders if this is the power of a rank S player, the kind of players they can only hear stories about. However, someone with a scar across their nose becomes visibly infuriated, angrily stating that this man is ruining his mission. Suddenly, a man introduces himself as Manhua, the leader of Seoul Station, and asks if Hyunwook is a rank S player. Hyunwook denies it, immediately warning them not to let their guard down so soon. He declares that the first wave isn't over yet. To everyone's dismay, two more giant spiders emerge. Mentally, Hyunwook concludes that there's no longer any doubt, asserting that this battle has confirmed everything. He declares that this so-called Seoul portal will be stopped by him, as he launches the massive swarm of spheres once more. Several military trucks begin approaching the portal zone. The soldiers gather following the conclusion of their battalion meetings, as an officer orders them to prepare the red ground. One member of the Blue Flower Guild comments that this always brings back memories. His companion changes the subject, asking whether they could gather all the mage players to use attack magic and destroy the capsule. The man explains that they cannot. After all, that's not magic. You can only break it if you replace the system with another. Unfortunately, they have no one with such an ability, so they must wait for the time limit to expire. Meanwhile, some helicopters land near the station. A member of the military descends from one of them. From another, a woman in elegant shoes steps out. It is the commander, accompanied by the head of the Blue Rose Guild department. He asks how many guild players are below level 15. She replies that her guild has no such people and questions whether he truly wants to send a rescue team. She complains, saying it would be tantamount to sending them to their deaths. He retorts that there are over 800 lives trapped inside and asks how she could prioritize the soldiers' lives over the civilians. Moreover, he reveals he has an ace in the zone. Inside the capsule, the protagonist is using his ability to crush. This allows him to destroy the carapace of yet another spider. Suddenly, one of the creature's sharp legs comes toward him. Using his body transformation ability combined with his metal control, he pulls himself backward to dodge. While evading, he orders the guards to use the runes to freeze the monster, just as they had done earlier. The team leader quickly volunteers to assist. With that, everyone uses the freezing eruption. They succeed in paralyzing the large spider. The protagonist shields himself to avoid being caught in the attack. Unfortunately for them, one of the creatures is nearing a female soldier. It leaps, attempting to catch her by surprise. However, the protagonist shouts at the insect not to get distracted and attacks it with his spears. He strikes it and saves the girl, declaring that he is the creature's only opponent. Using his metal spiral, the spheres begin spinning against the monster's skin. The beast screams in pain as it is pierced and torn apart from the inside. The creature collapses, reeking beside the guard. Meanwhile, the spider the soldier had been targeting manages to break free due to the interruption. It shatters the ice holding it. Still using his ability, the protagonist remarks that it's now returned to visit her fallen comrade. The system notifies him that his mana is now at 63%. The monster is utterly terrified as it experiences immense pain. He continues using the ability, causing his energy to form into two circles in his eye again. This depletes his mana further, dropping it to 39%. In return, he manages to defeat another spider. He feels somewhat fatigued after this battle. The villain mutters to himself that there's no reason for a player of that caliber to be riding a subway, lamenting that he hadn't expected to fail this first mission. The system indicates that his task is to spread the armored spider's venom and create nests. After failing, his death will be decreed. The man curses silently. On the other side of the station, the civilians have gathered together. The rest of the station is completely empty. They celebrate, thinking that the first wave has apparently ended, and call for the guards to regroup. The guards thank the protagonist, stating that if it weren't for the high-ranking player, they would have died, and ask for his name. However, the boy doesn't respond and looks at them with a terrifying expression. The soldiers are confused, except for one who appears to have fallen for him. The team leader asks if there's a problem. Mentally, the protagonist questions if the person is not present, swearing that in his past life, it was said the villain was one of the guards. Suddenly, the surgeon appears, calling for the protagonist. He realizes he had completely forgotten about her. Seeing the woman address him as a corporal, man who wonders whether ranks players are exempt from military duties, she reports that they successfully evacuated the population, placing them in rooms with narrow entrances, and asks if he stopped the wave alone. She demands that he report every detail of what happened. Mentally, he notes that he has no time to waste. The team leader asks about the corporal's rank. The protagonist replies that it's irrelevant right now, as this might be a double portal. Both look extremely confused and alarmed. He decides he can't waste time looking for the villain among 800 people, so he must stay one step ahead. Outside, the commander names Lieutenant Minhee as the field commander for the Seoul Station rescue operation. Minhee introduces himself as the leader of the 2nd platoon. The onlookers start murmuring, questioning why the leader of the 2nd platoon hasn't reached level 15 despite being rank C. Hearing the whispers, the man becomes visibly irritated. Kang-suk orders them to stay focused, saying that despite the heavy burden on his heart, he will send them inside and they need to save the civilians. All comply with the lieutenant major's command. To their surprise, he calls for Minhee again, ordering him to report all of Corporal Hyunwook's contributions and operations. The lieutenant is shocked, asking if he's really referring to Hyunwook's achievements. Back inside the capsule, the 2nd portal appears. Suddenly, a skeleton with a hole in its skull emerges. The system window notifies that the monsters will not attack it. Angrily, the skeleton questions the meaning of not attacking, stating that all the monsters are dead. It has 3 missions. The first one has failed, and the second requires it to kill at least 500 civilians by any means necessary. The villain tells himself he needs to endure, as completing this mission will allow him to become an ordinary villain. Suddenly, the protagonist's spheres come flying toward him. The villain begins generating roots to defend himself. He creates a sort of barrier around his body. With a sadistic smile, the man asks what the protagonist is doing, declaring that he's a railway guard. Hyunwook responds that the man had been hiding among the civilians, avoiding suspicion as a guard, so he'd kill them later. He comments that the villain really twisted his brain to pull this off. Calling him by name, Juseop, Hyunwook says it's been a long time. The villain asks who he is and whether they've met before. Smiling, the protagonist assures him that he knows him very well, calling him a little villain. The villain looks terrified. He starts claiming that he doesn't know what the protagonist is talking about, but warns him that he shouldn't have said the word villain out loud. He adds that he has seen Hyunwook's metal manipulation ability and assumes he is a Ranka player. The villain says he understands the protagonist's confidence, but asserts that ranking doesn't matter when compatibility is involved. He declares that those little metal marbles won't do anything against him. However, Hyunwook prepares his flaming breath. Opening his mouth, he forms a fireball and asks if the villain's ability is compatible with that. Back in the past, this guy was destroying a part of the city with the cannibal tree ability. Several people had been caught by the roots. He speaks to the great Emperor of Steel, asking how long he plans to stay hidden. The man asks if he is just going to stand still and watch his tree devour all those innocent people. The protagonist, wounded, watches this unfold. Juseop asks where all that talk from earlier went. Back to the present moment, the protagonist says he understands. He starts to dodge his enemy's attacks. The guy wonders what kind of movements those are. Suddenly, he charges towards his enemy. In an instant, Hyunwook closes the distance between them. His metal spheres are hitting the villain's shield. The protagonist notices that some sharp roots are coming to strike him. He quickly evades using his combined abilities. Startled, the man wonders why this crazy guy is coming towards him. Still midair, the protagonist points at the man and his spheres head towards the side he left unprotected. However, the man is able to create a barrier quickly, though with some difficulty. Hyunwook approaches even more while he says that the protagonist can do whatever he wants since he won't be able to hit him. But the boy was already hanging from his protection. Grinning madly, he says that the wood should be enough. The guy says that apparently the protagonist still doesn't understand his power, claiming that it changes nothing that he got closer. Grabbing his arms, the man says his ability is the cannibal tree, and that he will devour and digest his arms. However, a bit of flame starts to come out of his mouth. At the same time, he was transforming his arms into metal. Confused, Juseop begins to wonder why the tree hasn't digested his arms yet. At this moment, the protagonist creates a fireball in his mouth. The man is extremely scared, not understanding where the flames came from. The guy tries to negotiate, saying he's in the middle of a mission, and if the protagonist spares his life, they'll give him all the rewards. Convinced, the man thinks mentally that no one would refuse something like that. He says he's in search of evolution and can clean up the mess without effort. Adding even more fire in his mouth, the protagonist says that he used the same strategy in his past life. Seeing it getting closer, the man becomes afraid and asks what he means by past life. But Hyunwook tells him to die and activates his flame breath. It is notified to Mindy's squad that their entry has been authorized. He speaks to his troops, asserting that they don't know what kind of portal is inside. They prepare as they say they will enter. The system warns that this is a dangerous zone and that once they enter, they won't be able to leave. Suddenly, one of the soldiers becomes extremely scared. In front of him was the body of one of the giant spiders. The lieutenant tells Jumbo to shut up. Someone questions who is there, and the team leader says it's the rescue team. The chief of the guards appears, asking if it's really a rescue team. Above them, the great portal from which the spiders came was still there. The lieutenant says he hasn't seen any injured citizens. The guard informs him that thanks to a member of AMT, the civilians were evacuated. Mindy immediately asks if it's a soldier, questioning if she's injured or anything, but Manhu says she's taking care of his shelter. This makes the lieutenant very angry, while the chief of the guards informs them that they're following Hyunwook's orders. Jumno asks if he had spiky hair and occasionally made a sinister smile, which Manhu confirms. Mindy tells the boy to be quiet, saying he doesn't know his place. The protagonist, subordinate, obeys, clearly bothered. He tells the chief that from now on he's in charge, informing him that this guy is rank F. In a serious manner, Manhu asks how the lieutenant got in. He reminds the man that you need to be level 15 or lower to enter the capsule. Firmly, he says he knows the rank of the man they're following, stating he's also rank C, so he doesn't need to obey him. Manhu also says that they are a rescue squad that doesn't even know how they'll get the people out of there. Mindy says that for now, they'll build a barricade in a place with a narrow entrance, waiting for the end of the time. However, Seona appears, telling the team leader that they have big problems. The lieutenant asks if the platoon vice leader is okay, but she asks why he's there. The guy says he came to rescue her. Ignoring him, the woman says this isn't important and tells him that the civilians have noticed there's a second portal. This makes Manhu extremely worried. They were outraged, asking why they hid the fact that it's a double portal from them. The soldiers try to calm the crowd. One of them says that apparently that guard was right, claiming they're just being used as shields to buy time. She asks where he heard this, and the man says it was from a guard with a scar on his nose. Elsewhere, Hyuseop was with Burns, claiming he did all the preparations and that this wasn't a surprise, asserting that it was very difficult. The protagonist asks what he's complaining about, saying he has more things to do and tells the guy to die. Hyunwook asks if all these villains follow the same script. Suddenly, surprising him, a strong light comes towards him. A kind of portal forms in front of him. There was a view of the sky where something golden was shining ahead. Two women, very much resembling angels, approach, while it's said that his mana is quickly being restored. Both start flying around him as his life is recovered very effectively. They get closer and closer, surrounding him. He grins sinisterly, while the system announces that his mission has started. The secret mission, the Bearer of Light, begins, and he must be the Morning Light, becoming the guardian of humanity. The angels begin to try to take him inside the portal. It is said that this mission will guide him to become the Morning Light, questioning if he is willing to accept or not. Determined, the protagonist says his decision is obvious and refuses. Both angels are extremely surprised by his response. The system asks if he really wants to refuse, but Hyunwook says that, in the end, they are just a group, and depending on the rewards granted, his actions will be periodically restricted. Above all, this quest is not so simple. If this mission is misused, a guardian can become a villain in moments. Just like the worst traitor of humanity, Gordon Tracy. After all, he was also a guardian. Irritated, the protagonist asks how many times he will have to refuse. The golden-haired angel looks at him as though she is judging him. The red-haired angel does the same. However, she seems angrier than the other. As such, the divine portal begins to close. After it finally disappears from in front of him, the protagonist begins to use his ability. He picks up a key that was in the middle of that mountain of bones. It is notified that he has obtained the level 2 Akashic Cabinet key. This was the item Jusiop had been searching for. Or rather, this reward is a necessary object for the villains. In this case, of course, he will keep it to eliminate all those insects. The chief of the guards goes to the civilians, demonstrating that he is the only one with a scar on his face, explaining that it was fake. Others ask if he is sure it wasn't him, but the man in the suit repeats that it wasn't. However, he says that, in any case, they hid that there was a second gate, so there's no guarantee that they aren't shields. The protagonist mentally curses that guy, noting that even before dying, he caused an uproar. The lieutenant was talking to one of the people, trying to calm them down using his authority. The protagonist sees that the major lieutenant really didn't give up on the station until the end, but the population says they can't trust a rescue team with only 6 people. However, catching everyone's attention, the protagonist asks what's going on. Hyeonuk shouts, questioning if they still don't understand that if the second wave starts, everyone there will die. The guy says they can't trust them. That's why they're in this situation. Irritated, the surgeon asks if he has another way to survive other than trusting them. Everyone is stunned by how he spoke to the crowd. He says that the railway guards fought with their lives on the line, and that should be enough. He asks if there's anyone else who has put their life at risk. Minnie curses the protagonist, asking how he dares speak to the citizens like that, questioning where he's been hiding all this time. Angrily, he says he just defeated the second portal. Seonhead is surprised while Jummo calls for his surgeon. The chief of the guards mentally admits that this must be expected from a rank S. The lieutenant starts cursing him, saying he's lying shamelessly, claiming he wouldn't be able to do this alone. He says the second wave will start soon and tells the citizens to hide, while the guards and the platoon leader follow him. The chief of the guards promptly agrees, calling him sir. Minnie wonders if that is really the surgeon she knows, noting that he now has authority equal to a commander's. Back at the location of the first gate, Jummo hands the cloud sword to the protagonist and the spellbook of the platoon vice leader. He asks everyone to gather there, informing them that there is something he needs to tell them all. Hyeonuk says that the spider doesn't appear in the guides, which means the next one will probably be another monster they don't know. Still, something was missing for it to be a monster from a bad luck event. The chief of the guard says he also noticed something strange. Therefore, he believes it was due to the first wave, stating that according to the progress, venomous monsters might appear. Irritated, the lieutenant wonders why the vice leader, along with the guards, is listening to that loser. He says that's why everyone must wear masks and try to lure the monsters to the external platform to prevent the venom from spreading. With that, the protagonist says he will now explain the details of the operation to everyone. After the second wave starts, the spiders begin to emerge from the gate. He says that with this, it will be necessary to get their attention and lure them in. That will be his role. With this in mind, Hyeonuk grabs everyone's attention and starts dodging their attacks. The giant spiders fall to the ground, disoriented after being attracted to the boarding area. The guards team, along with the rescue team, should wait for him outside. That way, they can attack them while they are still unprotected. Thus, they will be able to attack them without them being able to hide or shelter themselves. Similar to the first wave, they need to freeze the feet and wait for the right moment. The guards use the freezing rune while the rescue squad shoots at the monsters. However, he had warned them not to approach them, no matter what happens. As such, one of the spiders tries to attack a soldier. It's the one again, who freezes in fear. Once again, Hyeonuk appears using his metal unfolding ability. He screams as he rips the monster's shell off, completely destroying it. A lot of blood pours out. With that, after he removes the spider shells, those in good position should attack them. This causes a lot of damage. Concentrating their attacks, they manage to bring them down. And at this moment, it will be the key moment. For the greatest success, the platoon leader and the vice leader must leave from a high position. Minnie says she can hardly believe she's with Shiona. And if the platoon leader helps her teleport frequently, she will be able to concentrate 100% of her mana on tearing off the armor. And if the vice leader keeps replenishing the lieutenant's mana, she believes that together they can use teleportation until the end. She asks the platoon leader, who is capable of recognizing and dealing with risky situations for each unit, if this plan is good. Happy that they asked his opinion, the guy says this strategy should allow them to pass with minimal damage. The protagonist says that in that case, they are under the care of the captain of the rescue team. All the units were already prepared, waiting for Hyeonuk to appear with the monsters. The portal starts generating strong gusts of wind. He screams that the second round will start soon, telling everyone to prepare. Another one of those spiders falls brutally to the ground. The impact is so strong that even the protagonist has to shield his eyes. He becomes convinced, grinning sinisterly, stating that his plan's already set. The status window had said that they need to survive for 6 hours or defeat the boss. This armored spider was different from the others, much more robust. He realizes that this is the true boss of the place, not believing believing what is happening. The creature stands up like a human, being extremely larger, and it is said that the boss monster has finally appeared. Hyunwook tells everyone to flee, while it is announced that they need to defeat the boss. Mentally, the platoon leader wonders what is happening, stating that he needs to control the situation first. He orders everyone to stay in their positions while telling the protagonist that he must lead them away from the civilians. The monster looks toward Hyunwook. It starts growling and making some noises. With that, the boss lets out a loud scream in his direction. He remembers that this boss appeared after the second wave. The soldiers below feel the pressure of this, while he wonders why the future has changed. Everyone, without exception, covers their ears from the immense noise. He realizes it's probably his fault. The giant spider tries to land a blow on him, but by luck, Hyunwook manages to dodge. The force of the attack is so great that everything around him shakes. He needs to take action, or else it will be annihilation of everyone. The protagonist uses his metal distortion ability. With this small attack, his mana goes down to 72%. The system notifies him that the ability used was ineffective since the resistance is greater than the breaking force. He launches another strike attempting to end the boy. However, Hyunwook uses his chain of abilities, managing to dodge the spider's paw. He continues dodging the attacks while trying to get closer. The sergeant notices that the pillar was destroyed with a single blow, realizing that his fortification ability wouldn't be enough to protect him. But still in the air, he thinks of a quick idea, noticing that the monster really destroyed the pillar. Interrupting his thoughts, the boss attacks him again, but he uses the combo of abilities and dodges. Supporting himself on the spider's paw, he begins to run. Even with slim chances, it's the only option he has at the moment. After gaining speed, he leaps upwards. Minnie asks what that crazy person is doing, telling him to lure the beast away as per the original plan. But mentally, Hyunwook assures that the lieutenant will understand, remembering a time when he was talking with him. The protagonist thanked him for his help, stating that he only survived thanks to his teleportation ability. He said he was happy to have Minhee as a partner, and apparently he wasn't bluffing when he said he had memorized all the strategies from the manual. The lieutenant says that memorizing books isn't enough to really have a good battle strategy, stating that he had let that rot in his head. He says that in order to surpass the limitation of his teleportation ability, he needed all the tactical details to use it, and each of those tactics is the result of his constant struggle to survive. The lieutenant asks what he is actually planning to do, but he, along with Shunha, watches that fight from the outside. The protagonist's mana is already at 45%. He says that with Minhee's deep knowledge of tactics, the guy will figure out what he's really thinking. His mana has already decreased to 32%. Struggling greatly, Hyunwook dodges another attack. Several pillars have already been destroyed. The platoon leader finally understands the boy isn't just dodging the attacks, he is making the pillars get destroyed. Removing his mask, he says that the guy is insane. The lieutenant asks Simone to give him the maximum amount of mana, to which she questions why. He says that he needs to create the largest teleportation zone possible, while the sergeant runs to the last pillar. His mana is at 27%. The boss raises both his hands, preparing for another powerful attack. Destroying the ground completely, he causes the protagonist to lose his footing. In addition to being startled, he feels great pain from the rocks. But he manages to reach the pillar, seeing that another blow from the boss is coming toward him. Hyunwook uses the body transformation, turning his entire front side into steel, leaving him with only 3% mana. He is thrown far away as the pillar is broken in half. Much of his defense is completely destroyed. He slams his back against a wall, creating a crater. The whole place begins to collapse. With this, he realizes that he has finally managed to destroy all the pillars that were holding the structure up. However, he can't let the monster realize that the place is falling apart. Trying to escape from the crater, he says that he needs to serve as bait. Minnie calls him a lunatic and tells him to get out of there, but he remains where he was thrown while the event boss heads toward him. The lieutenant creates a portal under one of the monster's paws while saying that he won't last much longer. Hyunwook asks Minhee to do it or else they will die. The platoon leader starts putting in a lot of effort, trying to launch his power. He finally manages to create a giant portal to make the monster fall into it. The beast falls into the same place again. The boss looks up, noticing something. The entire structure is collapsing on top of him again. The protagonist smiles, stating that he knew the lieutenant would do a great job. As the place collapses, he says he's proud of his partner. Minnie begins to cry as she calls for him, declaring that he is a psychopath. Siona finally understands the situation and screams his name desperately. Hyunwook recalls his past life once again. He speaks to Yuna, mentioning that they lost many comrades, making him question whether he should really be the leader. The woman looks at him silently. Suddenly, she calls him by name. Angrily, she tells him that he's pathetic, asking who decides if he deserves to be a leader, also questioning if he doesn't trust himself. The protagonist simply averts his gaze, back to the moment when everything collapses. He was still stuck in the hole in the wall. Hyunwook apologizes to everyone, noticing that he only has 3% mana left. He throws himself headfirst toward the ground. As the continuation of that memory comes to his mind, Yuna had grabbed him by the collar of his shirt. She tells Hyeonuk not to bear everything alone, asking him to look into the eyes of those around him. Opening his eyes, the protagonist realizes that it's not the ground waiting for him, but Shunha and the platoon leader. He can't believe what he's seeing, but he quickly extends his hand toward her. The lieutenant can barely keep the portal open. After his companion passes through, he closes it as the girl grabs him. The entire section of the station starts to collapse. Someone calls the battalion commander, while the system alerts that the event boss has appeared. It's mentioned that the media is pushing for a statement about the appearance of the event boss and the actions that will be taken. Kang-suk gets irritated upon realizing what is happening. A subordinate informs Haina that the chief said if she keeps acting this way, her position won't last much longer. She says her brothers are ambushing her, acting as if they were expecting this. The commander notes this conversation. He doesn't seem too pleased with what he hears. The woman tells everyone to stop staring at her, stating that she will call him as that's all she needs to do. Irritated, she wonders why it has to be him out of all those people. On her phone, the contact is saved as Crazy Dog. Inside, much of the place had already collapsed. The vice platoon leader asks if the protagonist is trying to kill himself. She admits that she really thought he might die. A little nervous and frustrated, he notes that the future has changed, realizing he no longer knows how useful his information is. Siobhan notices he isn't answering her. On the other hand, the lieutenant gets angry about this. He curses the protagonist, asking who he thinks he is, stating that those people would have died if he wasn't there. The man says that tactics are based on promises, that you must trust your comrades, who will listen and follow the agreed-upon plan. Minnie asks if he really thought acting alone was better, questioning if he truly trusts his comrades. At that moment, the protagonist remembers Yuna's words from his past life. Hyunwook opens a wide smile. The vice platoon leader scolds the lieutenant, saying that now isn't the time for these things. The protagonist thanks Minnie, saying that thanks to him, he now has an idea of what to do. The man doesn't understand what he's talking about. Hyunwook says that the boss will soon emerge from below, but now he has found a way for them to get out of there. The platoon leader says he wants to do things alone again. However, they need a strategy and starts explaining it. But the protagonist completes his plan, stating that since he has iron skin, it will use electricity and everyone will need to work together. He asks everyone to listen to him, stating that from now on, the boss's death is Jumbo's responsibility. The boy, nervous, asks if it really has to be him. All the reporters ask Kang-sok for a statement, questioning what will happen to the people inside the station. They ask him to provide any additional details confirmed so far, saying they will make a summary. He replies that at this moment, the event's secondary rescue team has been sent. They ask if he really sent a team with soldiers below level 15 to face a boss. Back at the capsule, the boss emerges from the wreckage. He looks around trying to find the survivors. The beast starts making noise again. He screams once more, creating a massive sound wave. It was so powerful that the protagonist and his companions have to strain to stay in place. Suddenly, something catches his attention. Above his head, a large water magic spell is being formed. Manhua orders the guard team to release the water orb. All the members were hiding behind pillars and other objects. After the monster gets completely soaked, they use an amplification rune. With that, Hyunwook tells his subordinate to use the electric attack. Junmo hits the circle with his electrified hammer. This causes it to take massive damage thanks to his metallic body. He screams in pain as he takes a strong shock. The boy calls out for his surgeon. The protagonist tells him to keep holding on until the ice rune is ready. Suddenly, someone shouts, telling everyone to stop moving. The soldiers, along with the guards, place their hands on their necks as they fall to the ground. Even the lieutenant feels something. Everyone, including the monster itself, feels that pressure. Kang-seok says that the second team consists of only one S-rank player with no level restrictions. The king of Tazen's fist, Han Tazen, the fist king, the second strongest in Korea and ninth in the world ranking. He says that everyone has worked hard. The man states that he will take care of this from now on, asking everyone to rest. The protagonist realizes that this is the true authority of an S-rank. This is the lazy tiger. Tazen says he doesn't like to eat at the same table, so if anyone is after his snack, they can already consider themselves dead. Hey everyone, did you enjoy this story? I really liked it. If you want to follow the next part, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you in the next story, guys.